Legendary Pokemon have been shaping the world as you know it, without you even realizing it. For example, Mewtwo living in caves attracts both psychic and weaker Pokemon to it for protection. Kyurem freezes the world around it, allowing ice Pokemon to live in warmer environments. And Ultra Necrozma's light gives life not only to Alola, but also the home of Naganadel. But what about the many other legendary and mythical Pokemon? How do they change the environment and the lives of other Pokemon? These are the questions I'll answer today, as I bring to you how legendary Pokemon change the ecosystem. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and while I have completed the ecosystems from Kanto to Alola, with more to come in the future, I wanted to take a special look and focus on the legendary Pokemon and their effect on the ecosystem. It's amazing what they do, and it all started with realizing, without Pokemon like Kyurem, Metagross and Vanillux likely would never be found in the wild, but we'll explain how that all works later. We're going to go through the generations, talking about each and every legendary and mythical Pokemon, and how they change the ecosystem to better fit themselves and the other, more common Pokemon. Of course, there are some that are more affected by the ecosystem than they affect it, but we'll talk about them when we get there. Let's begin with the three legendary bird Pokemon, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. These three Pokemon are already labeled as individuals who bring with them the seasonal changes of the year. Articuno represents winter. It creates entire blizzards as it flies through the winter air and freezes any moisture found within them. And since ecology is the study of animals and their effect on each other and nature, we can include the knowledge that Articuno will even help lost travelers who are in the mountains. The first layer that we actually find Articuno in is within the Seafoam Islands, a pair of islands situated on Route 20 within Kanto. A place that, once you delve deeper and deeper inside, you begin to realize just how freezing the place is. This would make sense for certain times of the year, with caves being cooler on the inside during hotter days or even hotter during colder days, and we can attribute that to a number of different factors in any other situation than this one. Because thanks to Articuno, this place is cold year-round, despite the outside climate. And going further than this, Articuno turns this island cave into a winter wonderland for our Pokemon friends who love the cold and actually need it to live and even thrive. While there are many Pokemon here such as Slowpoke, Zubat, and Horsey, all Pokemon who will need a warmer environment, as you move deeper and deeper into the caves, the populations of Pokemon do begin to change. And as I do in my ecology series, we are going to assume higher encounter rates means a higher population. This may not always actually be the case, such as when prey species hide away from sight from their predators, but it is a good base guideline. While other populations drop, there is an increase of seal as you delve deeper into the colder parts of these islands. This goes as far as allowing us to enter a portion that is cold enough to house Seal's evolution, Dugong. It is strange, though, to still see Horsey here, but we can assume that since Seadra and Kingdra live near the bottom of the ocean, that this is why we find Seadra here. Meaning they kind of go against what we would typically expect of a seahorse, which likes temperatures around 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. From here, any Pokemon that tend to survive and exist within the caves are ones that have evolved. Slowbro, Kingler, Golbat, all of them adapting to better withstand not only the colder environment, but also the pressure of other Pokemon competing to live here. Depending on which games you look at, Dugong ends up having nearly a quarter of the population here on land, with only Golbat beating them by 6%. You might want to say that this breaks our understanding of the ecology here, but what this could mean is that they like the colder environment, or alternatively, which I like a little bit more, is that they are hibernating here. Or maybe all that blood they drink is actually keeping them warm, because ultimately there are a ton of other Pokemon here that it's able to get its meal from, replacing all the important calories that it might lose thanks to shivering that it might be doing. Within the Let's Go games, we also get the addition of Jinx, which we know primarily exists only in the colder environments, and is even called the Queen of the Ice within Galar. They've also had a strange association with the legendary birds before. For example, within the original Pokemon Snap, they help hatch Articuno's egg. This has never been seen anywhere else other than Snap, but it is at least interesting to note. The one part that makes this harder to understand though is of course what Pokemon are washing into this place and which ones actually live here. For example, it is noted that Staryu will get washed into caves, allowing them to get stuck there for a while. But thanks to all the Slowpoke being here and the cold environment, it's become a great place for not only the Shelter that we find here, but also the Cloyster, now being an ice type and a Pokemon that actively hunts down Slowpoke for their tails. And of course, as you reach the bottom floor, you will encounter a room just for Articuno in its wintry splendor. This will be the first example of how the effect of the legendary Pokemon radiates from them. To explain, the coldest area is where Articuno is spending most of its time. And as we've explained, the further you are from it, the warmer things are. Though it is important to note that in some depictions of the Seafoam Islands, even the area outside may be completely frozen. Don't worry about Articuno's Galarian version, by the way. We'll talk about all three of those versions after we speak about Zapdos and Moltres to tie everything together on how they impact ecology in their areas. The embodiment of spring and thunderstorms has arrived with booms that echo across the lands in the form of Zapdos. And while I am primarily sticking to the main games, I have to note its appearance within Mystery Dungeon, and I may be doing so, or at least noting the anime in some scenarios as well, depending on the Pokemons we discuss. Pokemon, not Pokemons, I sound like I'm a mother trying to be hip. Anywho, within Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX, it lives at the top of a mountain, causing there to be constant storms. Also, kind of remember playing the game for a while and getting stuck because I was a Bulbasaur with Squirtle as my partner. You can imagine how that played out for me. And while that mountain had a slew of different Pokemon, the strangely more fitting place for us to see the effect that Zapdos has is when we find it within the abandoned power plant. This power plant is explained to have been built by humanity within the manga, polluting the environment, and then abandoned once its use was worn out or just not being built completely to begin with. And while it isn't shown, Blue originally came to the power plant long ago for Zapdos. This would be after Lieutenant Surge had captured it and used its limitless electricity that it generates to superpower his Pokemon and allow them to use their moves without limit and without getting tired. This is important to know because it doesn't mean that Zapdos took over the power plant and pushed humanity out, but that it came here to make a home for itself, a nest, and other Pokemon as a minor resting point. Its electricity would then serve to attract electric-type Pokemon, and as the power plant itself states, allows it to become so abundant with these Pokemon that the place is considered infested with them. Pikachu, Magnemite, Voltorb, and their evolutions are all found here alongside both Grimer, Muk, Coughing, and Wheezing, who are representative of the pollution that this place has. We also throw in Electabuzz, with all of these electric Pokemon being ones that consume electricity for food or for their overall health and energy, maybe even evolution. These electric types are primarily infesting the actual technology itself, and it's all easily attributable to Zapdos releasing energy into said technology, with lightning crackling from its wings constantly and causing it to course through and make a perfect home for them. Now, Moltres is a bit harder to truly say causes a major change in its environment, and feels like it may actually be fueling the environment, and it refuels Moltres in return. A sort of heat cycle or heating bank. Within Victory Road in the first generation, Moltres will appear on the second floor with what doesn't seem to have any additional effects or correlation within the populations of Pokemon or the environment. But when we look at Mount Silver's Cave, there is a very distinct change. Because while the encounters are fairly consistent across the board, we'll see an increase of Quagsire for one of the very interesting and strange changes. It is only by 5% in increase, but with Mount Silver being a place where snow is commonplace at the top, thanks to the cold, we can begin to see what's actually happening. In this instance, thanks to Moltres being here in this inner chamber, it allows the environment to stay warmer. Water flows easier, and it overall stays more moist, creating a better environment for Pokemon like Quagsire that need the consistent moisture or else their skin dries out. But a more significant effect is that thanks to the warmth, whereas we see Onix in every other area, we find a full Steelix here. The fun part about Steelix is that they can occur naturally. They just need to live long enough or absorb the right materials, while they also aim to dig towards the core of the earth, nice and toasty. They never get close, of course. In fact, they don't even dig deeper than some of the mines we as humans have made, but that's just based on the Pokédex info. And to better explain why Steelix can appear, I suppose there must be a change here that there are higher metal deposits being melted by Moltres, then allowing Onix to become covered in the molten material, become coated in it, and evolve. This is the basic idea, after all, when it comes to Metal Coat, and Onix is just literally becoming coated in metal through the use of that item, and then becomes Steelix. I will also say that Moltres seems to enjoy being inside of mountains or nesting within them on lower levels. These lower levels, while not underground, can be associated with higher pressure and higher heat. And the higher both of those are together, and dependent upon the rock material, it can result in one thing that Moltres absolutely does love: molten magma. And upon the summit of Mount Ember, we can encounter Moltres as well, helping us match all this together. Its description, at least when it comes to Mount Ember, is a supposedly inactive volcano. There are persistent reports that the peak blazes with fire at night. While there are Geodude, Graveler, and Machoke throughout the mountain, eating rocks and training themselves, or at least the Machoke are training themselves, they're not eating rocks out there. Only at the summit do we find only those rocky boys, and only in the lowest levels do we see more and more Slugma and Magcargo the deeper you go. This goes back to something I genuinely believe is happening, and that is Moltres, being a Pokemon that releases a lot of heat, is refueling the volcano, causing it to be more active. Then the volcano in return, through becoming active, through melting and displacing heat and creating its own cycle again, becomes a place in which Pokemon who need the magma to thrive and can do so. It's a strangely beautiful cycle when you think about it, and it may actually be more common in the real world than you think. Not to say that there's giant flaming rubber chickens fueling volcanoes, but rather that the whole ecosystem fueling and being fueled by the same creature or grouping of creatures. To be fair, that is the basis of farming in a very, very oversimplified way. But this is also something that Darwin believed in, and while rarely talked about, he was self-described as having biophilia. And to take a brief tangent, there are a lot of ways to describe what biophilia is, with one being that we, as living beings, are in love with life, the enrichment of it, the purpose behind it, and everything about it. And so we, as living creatures, find ways to make life persist, which in turn makes us feel more alive in our own ways. So, as we get back to not only Moltres, but the entire trio of our birds, we start to see how they, as living creatures, are fueled by their environments and then in turn enrich their environments. This then leads me into their Galarian variants. The Galarian bird trio have a lot of different theories going on, though we at least know two things for sure: that the three legendary birds are commonly mistaken to be flying through the sky in Galar, and that these Galarian birds arrive here every year to get their fill of fruit from the Dino Tree. We as a community have also come to the consensus that Articuno is winter, Zapdos is spring, and Moltres is summer. But fall, for some reason, isn't represented until we look at these Galarian forms. Forms that also appear before a red, very autumn-colored tree, which would be representative of the harvest season. Also, it's a tree that's created by, the king of bountiful harvests, the fairy king known as Calyrex. So despite it seeming like a mistake, I think it's very safe to say that people within the world of Pokemon are legitimately seeing the legendary birds fly through Galar. They return to eat the fruit of the Dino Tree, which then changes how they look, and by the time they return to other regions, they have changed back to the forms we are most familiar with. What this then allows is for the three birds to bring the season's changes to different places as they travel throughout the world separately, as they are apt to do, until they return back to Galar. Because even in the games, they're just not really found together. The closest we ever get to them all being in the same spot, in the games that is, would be in the Sea Spirit Den of Kalos, the same place that is suggested to be one of Lugia's dens, and even then, they don't all appear at the same time. So at the end of this, after traveling the world and bringing the change of seasons, which allows all life to flourish in different ways at different times, their return to the Dynatree refuels these birds and empowers them to continue their journeys and help the world in their own ways. A Pokemon created by man with the intention of creating something more powerful than anything ever found in nature. Mewtwo. A strong phrase that has stuck to this Pokemon throughout the generations as it continues to uphold its crown. But despite being created with the intent of becoming a weapon, Mewtwo defies this and would eventually learn that it doesn't need to prove itself through battle in order to justify its own existence. And in doing so, the circumstances of one's birth are truly shown to be irrelevant, as it provides a safe home and shelter for other Pokemon. Though this is really only shown directly within the anime or movies through Mewtwo protecting the cloned Pokemon. There is one exception to that though, and that would be through the Pokemon village within Kalos. This village is full of Pokemon that are distinctly stated to be hiding away from people for a number of different reasons. Now, I did recently talk about this in my video on the many mysteries of Kalos, but allow me to explain in brief here. Much like the Mewtwo in the movies, who was mistreated alongside the rest of the cloned Pokemon, Mewtwo sees the Pokemon here and has decided to protect them. And in doing so, it resides within what is named the Unnamed Cave, which is a little bit of an oxymoron, but whatever, which is then situated within Pokemon Village. The best part about this cave is that you can only access it after becoming champion, you have to surf to it, and its unnamed nature is something that matches one of the names of the cave in which it parallels, Cerulean Cave. While its purpose within Kalos is pretty straightforward, it is its effect on ecology within Cerulean Cave that is interesting in its own right. At first, I was really hoping to see a slew of psychic Pokemon, but instead we find high-level and even evolved Pokemon everywhere. To be fair, this is also something that is noted by officials within Pokemon, that this is why you aren't allowed to enter the cave, and you need to become a champion first, because it is simply stated to be far too dangerous because of the sheer number of the powerful Pokemon that do appear here. Though at least at the bottom of Cerulean Cave, we do consistently find 3 Pokemon until the Let's Go games, and this would be Kadabra, Wobbuffet, and Ditto. Meanwhile in Let's Go, we still at least get Ditto with the addition of Golduck as an honorary psychic Pokemon. So not only are generally powerful Pokemon being drawn in here, but Pokemon with psychic abilities are being attracted here, whereas they may only ever be seen in one other place than this cave, and separately from each other. But then there's Ditto, a Pokemon that we've been told is not a failed Mew clone, despite all the different ties that we have. These ties do include their high encounter rate within the Burned Mansion and their shiny matching with Mew. We can't count the additional chambers added in the Let's Go games, because that's just a reference to the other clones that were in the Mewtwo movie. But this still leaves us with the question of why are the Ditto consistently within Mewtwo's domain? Because they're even at the Pokemon Village. Well, it's way simpler than we may expect, which is that Ditto feel safer and more protected around Mewtwo, and other legendaries for that matter. Think of it this way. Ditto don't fight with each other, they transform into Pokemon in order to mimic and hide amongst them, and they aren't really shown needing to eat food at all. They mimic humans within Alola. In Pokopia, they maintain their form while mixing parts together, which is something they've been hinted to be able to do since the TCG, before Pokopia's teaser, but at the end of the day, they're typically still very friendly. So we essentially have what is a pacifist Pokemon on our hands that loves to be friends with others, while also being very rare. And even if we take the Burned Mansion into account, nobody should be entering that place due to how dangerous it is there. Ditto just wants to be safe, and so this is why it is so common around Mewtwo's whereabouts and other legendaries, because nearly nobody is about to walk into Mewtwo's lair or any of the other ones to square up with them, especially when Mewtwo specifically has bodied every single Pokemon that has ever challenged him. Mewtwo's change to ecology is that at the end of the day, it serves as a protector to the weak, to the Pokemon looking for safety from humans that they fear because they've been hurt, or Pokemon that are coming here because they can feel the threat, the challenge that Mewtwo actually serves to be. And this won't be the last time we have a Pokemon that affects the ecosystem in this way.
Wait, have you been sitting around for hours at a time at a desk? You know that's not good for your body, but what can you do since you work a desk job, love your gaming, and want to listen to the complete multi-day backlog of Acrylic VA videos? Well, you can pick up the E6 standing desk from FlexiSpot. I'm literally standing right now, so it makes it a little difficult to show it, but check out these images, these little videos I'm throwing your way. I'm honestly incredibly picky about my desks, and this hits all of my standards while helping me get off my rotund rump. Let's run you through the beauty of this table. It raises and lowers with minute precision, so you can set it at levels perfectly comfortable for yourself, and you can even press a few simple buttons to have it memorize your sitting and standing positions to get rid of the guesswork, allowing you to switch between sitting and standing with ease as often as you want throughout the day. When I was testing it, the table went past my eyes and hit my roof. Well, I caused it to hit the roof. The table tried not to. So if you're a jolly giant, you're still well taken care of, as this table is going to reach those extra heights. I'm a bit lame, but I also need good depth with my desk for decor, screens, and if I ever want to eat or write at the desk, then there's tons of room available. And let me tell you, when I first set all of this up, this desk hits all of that perfectly with no finagling. It was nice and easy, leaving me incredibly satisfied. And if you want to get yourself standing more regularly at your desk to improve your health, or at least help do so, and stop sitting like a shrimp, follow my link in the description or pinned comment, and you'll not only be doing yourself a favor, but me as well, as some of that gets kicked back my way. So thank you to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video, and back to the video.
We've reached our first mythical Pokemon, number 151 itself, Mew. Now, there are a lot of confusing details about Mew that have happened over the years, and let's clear them up now so we can understand what's even happening, and then some. Mew is the ancestor of all quote-unquote Pokemon, but this would only be the case for Pokemon on Earth, maybe some from space, but does not include literally every single Pokemon. For example, Arceus is a fragment of a non-Pokemon unnamed god, and it created the Origin Trio. As such, we've already removed Mew from the equation entirely. Next, Mew's fossilized eyelash is the reason why Mewtwo could be recreated, and there have been no other fossil records of Mew whatsoever. If we look at the manga, Blaine uses his human cells to help create Mewtwo then, with the fragments of Mew's DNA not being complete from that eyelash, but that's neither here nor there at this point. There has always been speculation, though, that there have been multiple Mew, but it has never been confirmed. They're just thought to have all gone extinct, but again, no confirmation. Despite all of this, it still has the genetic code of all Pokemon and can replicate almost every move, if taught, with the exception of moves that are exclusive to special Pokemon. This would include Pikachu's Volt Tackle and Keldeo Sacred Sword. And at the end of the day, all this becomes so confusing because Mew was never even intended to be a publicly available Pokemon, which is hilarious to me. So let's take a tangent. Because developer Shigeki Morimoto added Mew to the code as an Easter egg just for his colleagues at Game Freak, using space on the cartridge that was freed up after debug tools were removed. Some players discovered Mew via glitches, starting rumors of a secret Pokemon that were hard for fans to verify or disprove in the early days of the internet, which I find really funny, and if for some reason I ever develop a game, I will find a way to make the code unreadable and then put a creature that has a 0.1% of a chance of appearing in the background and just staring at you with the most deadpan face possible. But back to Mew, it was considered a mirage, not in real life, but in the games, in the lore, and a non-existent Pokemon from Guyana, even though that has also now changed with Pokemon stepping further and further away in their lore from the real world's direct references they once had in terms of locations or animals in the Pokedex. But at the end of the day, Mew sticks to itself and blasts just about anyone who tries to capture it as it speeds off into the distance or just teleports away. Even within Pokemon Snap on the Switch, it kind of just teases us and doesn't interact with any other Pokemon. It's almost as if the once named Mirage Pokemon will not be seen by anyone it doesn't want to be seen by, and it will not leave any trace of its existence wherever it goes if it can help it. But it has already made its impact on ecology by causing the Pokemon Tree of Life to flourish, which actually, this reminds me, if we want to go the route of the anime, there is the Lucario and the Mystery of Mew movie. This movie includes what is called the Tree of Beginning and is filled with not only rare Pokemon, but otherwise extinct fossil Pokemon, and has the original Regi trio guarding the tree from the inside. The Pokemon here are suspected to have been protected and raised here for tens of thousands of years or even longer, explaining why, of course, fossil Pokemon would be here. The idea of Cradily specifically being here predates that tens of thousands of years by a wide margin, by the way. Now, it is a rock formation that appears to be a gigantic tree. The Tree of Beginning is actually a living organism made up of crystals that feed on sunlight, and it has a symbiotic connection with a Mew that lives within it. Centuries ago, Sir Aaron sacrificed himself to transfer his aura power to Mew so it could restore peace to the land and save it from two raging Pokemon armies. Though in the modern day, Mew is attacked and history seems to be replaying itself. In the movie, it's actually a little bit funny because this kingdom that appears within it, that knows about the tree, seems to be the only one with a long-standing history with not only the tree, but with Mew. Mew will just apparently appear, play with toys, and then disappear without them ever being seen again. And it ended up taking Pikachu and Mouth with it, which kickstarts a big part of our journey. There's a full circulatory system that you can get sucked into and travel through within this tree. The rocks themselves are alive as part of said system. Time flowers grow throughout the place, and through the use of them and aura, you can see the past. And as Jesse and James are walking through, I actually got kind of caught off guard by James and Regirock's entrance.
It's a blast!
Actually, the Regis in general just absolutely send me, because how can you not laugh at this? Now, what is compared to a white blood cell within the movie is simply one of the rocks that transforms to take shape of a Cradily, which then captures Jesse, and an Amistar then takes shape that captures James, which James is an absolute Chad. He releases Chimecho right before he effectively dies. Same goes for May, and Pokemon apparently aren't considered dangerous by this natural defense mechanism, but people are absolutely on that dinner plate as everyone is eventually caught. They all are releasing their Pokemon, and they're effectively dead, right? Though luckily Mew does bring them all back, because it is eventually revealed that Mew has more than what is described as a symbiotic relationship, in my opinion. It can flat out affect the entirety of the Tree of Beginning. I'm actually genuinely at a loss as to how to describe it, but even the Regis back off, as it is stated by Meowth that Mew spoke to the tree and told it that the humans weren't invaders. Though afterwards, Mew does become sick and the tree begins to just flat out disintegrate. It begins breaking down as everything goes out of balance. The tree goes into shock, and the immune system, quote unquote, is reeling from overreacting to everyone entering it now that it is no longer actively attacking. Think of it like running on adrenaline and then suddenly you calm down and all the after effects hit at once. Now, if the tree dies, then Mew will effectively die and vice versa, which further might imply that at least within the movies that there may have been more than one tree, more than one Mew. But at the end, Ash is willing to put his life on the line, like the Chad he often is, to give aura to Mew to save the tree and all the Pokemon, because oh boy, everything is falling apart. We're talking a real cataclysm here, but with enough aura and Lucario giving literally all that he has, he saves Mew, saving the tree and all the other Pokemon here, and effectively has sacrificed itself, going back to Sir Aaron, who he says himself is calling to Lucario, as Lucario then disappears. So even if it's just this one instance, we can understand just how deeply ingrained Mew is to the ecology here, and how Mew keeps the tree alive, the tree keeps Mew alive, and they both serve the Pokemon who live within it, and are served in return. Ecology, who would have guessed? The legendary beasts are another set of unique cases that have varying levels of effects on the Pokemon world around them. In the case of these Pokemon, they have all been given the mission through Ho-Oh to find a human with a pure heart that connects with them. This has been one of their many goals since they have been revived by Ho-Oh after the tragedy of the burned tower. Each of them have a different relationship with humans. For starters, Raikou is distrustful of humans, though it may form a friendship with those that help it. The other two get a little bit better, with Suicune technically having the best until it tries to bop every single gym leader in the manga, but that's a different story. They appear, or at least Raikou appears, during thunderstorms and can control storm clouds at will. And as all of our beasts are apt to do, it races across the lands at high speeds. This is a key detail to note because it means that each of the effects that our trio brings are widespread throughout any lands that they might visit. And while we typically associate them with Johto, they have appeared even as far as Kalos and as a shiny form within Unova, which I always thought was a alternate version of them from an alternate timeline since Celebi is in that movie, but there's no confirmation and it weirds me out. These thunderstorms, though, are important for any electric types like Electabuzz in Johto, Zebstrika and Blitzel herds in Unova, and many other electric Pokemon that rely on lightning for a greater source of natural energy. Otherwise, Raikou, while representing the lightning bolts that destroyed the tower or kickstarted it, it may represent storms that may cause forest fires and reset environments as the ashes are used to restart the cycle of life. On the lines of ashes, we can move to talk about Entei. And as a side, I've always loved how the smoke billows down from Entei, as though it were ash and pyroclastic material that you would typically expect from volcanic eruptions, something that it causes when it barks. It gets a bit strange, as there are rumors in the world that Entei is born whenever a volcano appears, and whenever it barks, a volcano erupts. So, gets a little complicated. If this is true, then I'm a little worried for the world ecosystem, and if ever a bunch of Entei got together for some puppy playtime. That aside, eruptions of volcanoes have a massive array of potential effects depending on the overall size and power of the eruption. It can temporarily affect the climate itself in some capacity, though it's fairly limited, unless, it's dinosaur age and you mix that in with a bunch of other happenings that then brought about the end of the dinosaurs, blotted out the skies, so on and so forth. If you want information on that, go check out my, Ancient World of Pokemon Solved video. It's really fun. And overall, though, with volcanic eruptions, it can simply lower air quality while also providing ash and new material to fertilize the surrounding area in just quick, relevant summary. With enough time and eruptions, volcanoes also serve to expand the lands that they are on or the areas that they are in as a whole, being able to go as far as helping create entire islands. I'm looking at you, Hawaii. One day I will go to you, and the amount of research that I will conduct is absurd, as I will finally be able to talk to officials firsthand about Polynesian culture. But it feels pretty clear-cut now how these volcanoes not only affect Pokemon or the world itself with their eruptions, but also how they affect the life of Moltres, who takes a bit of a skinny dip into lava in order to get itself all healed up. This is already allowing us to see how Pokemon that we don't see directly interact with each other do have an effect on each other. Though, of all three of these beasts, the one that arguably may affect the most Pokemon is my personal favorite, Suicune. Otherwise known as the embodiment of the Northern Wind, a Pokemon that has the closest bond to Ho-Oh and has a hidden relationship with the unknown. Suicune travels through the lands of the world with the winds, and with a singular touch, it purifies the waters it travels across. We can see it in springs, oceans, even within Arctic lands within Lentil. There's seemingly no limit to where our trio of dogs may reach, but Suicune is at least directly shown in a few extra locations. This is massive within the world of Pokemon because, unfortunately, just like the real world, there is a lot of extra pollution that has affected Pokemon. Industrial sites, large companies, and so much more contributing to this effect. It isn't shown as well within the games, but within the Adventures manga, there are far more instances of this, with a strong underlying focus on what humanity has done to damage the natural splendor of the world. Meanwhile, Pokemon are born from the filth, like Ghastly apparently, who eats noxious fumes, or Suicune here, who serves to purify the tainted waters that Pokemon drink and live inside of. And what I love about these Pokemon as a trio is that they all provide renewal, purifying things in their own way. And while we might see Raikou and Entei as a more destructive way to purify or reset nature, Suicune is able to remedy any downsides created by the other two with water or purifying of said water. Though not everything in nature needs to be purely good, of course, we need to have some level of natural destruction to allow things to flourish once more. Watatsumi, the sea spirit, more commonly known as Lugia, or at least one of the sea spirits, a gigantic creature that rests at the bottom of the sea and serves as its guardian. Its wings can bring about immense destructive power that it simply exudes naturally just by existing and flapping its wings. This power has caused great storms lasting 40 days, which is literally biblical in proportion. Not even joking here about this. The storm of Noah's Ark lasted 40 days and 40 nights. Pokemon Bible video will be added to my list because that sounds really fun. But Lugia can also calm these storms, allowing those it allows to have safe passage reach it or their destination, though its home is found at the Whirlpool Islands. These islands, of course, being protected by whirlpools that are, in turn, caused by Lugia. Strong swimmers and strong Pokemon overall are the only ones making their lives here, except little Krabby, which I assume is just enjoying its time on the seafloor. Funny enough, other than Pokemon simply becoming stronger and evolving the closer we get to Lugia in its domain, there isn't much of a difference. I will also note that we don't get Dugong in any version of these islands, allowing us to reaffirm that the cold environment that Articuno creates allows Seal to evolve into Dugong within Articuno's environment. As with many of our legendary or mythical Pokemon, there aren't any other locations that we can see the effect that Lugia has. But with Lugia and the Whirl Islands representing the Naruto Strait, we can look towards this real-life area where consistent whirlpools appear to understand how Lugia truly affects the ecosystem. The greatest thing is to realize just how much the water mixes around here. Lots of movements can be difficult to navigate, but it also prevents sediment buildup. This sediment can hold nutrients that build up too much and encourage excessive growth of certain bacteria, harming the environment. For example, something I studied a lot of firsthand in the field and in the lab is phosphorus. It's an important substance that drives plant growth, but too much of it is, of course, a bad thing. It is produced in a slew of different ways and lasts a long time in the environment, literal years. So when it settles at the bottom of a lake and it rains, then it all releases and cyanobacteria has a buffet for themselves to enjoy. This in turn causes massive blooms of this bacteria, which eats up oxygen and blocks out sunlight as they kind of make a film on top of the water, in turn potentially creating dead zones where plants die and other creatures fail to thrive, literally called dead zones, or just, as I like to say, a pillar of death. So in opposition to this, these whirlpools continue mixing water between the Seto Inland Sea and the Pacific Ocean, as it is powered by the water level difference between them, which I assume is caused by a steep ground drop-off underwater, as that would make the most sense, as opposed to like the sea literally being higher where we can see it, without any rocks or anything else being there. But with all of these nutrients also mixing, it disperses them as well and ensures creatures such as plankton thrive. And when they thrive, the fish that eat them thrive, and of course bigger and bigger fish thrive until it results in things like birds or humans eating them. Now, I want you to take all of that information and think of it as the Magikarp. Think of it as the Horsey, the Seal, and the Tentacruel. Even Golbats will gain from all of this as an abundant ecosystem is fueled. And as a final note, plankton are confirmed in multiple dex entries to exist, and it will pain me for the rest of my mortal life unless we get a tried and true plankton Pokemon. If I get one wish, Mr. Pokemon, if you ever notice me for some reason this will be my one and only ask. Plankton aren't even my favorite creature. I just need them to exist properly in a Pokemon form, please. Oh man. Ho-Oh honestly feels like it breaks the ecosystem a little bit if I have to be completely honest with you. The first sign of this is of course the fact that Ho-Oh technically cheats life and death, but I recently learned that it technically may not. I've always suspected that Ho-Oh granted a bit of its energy, but thanks to insight from an individual known as Boltoy, who has a slew of posted writings on Pokemon, lost lore, development processes, and so much more, they're an individual I really want to cover the work of, as I have been given permission from them. But in the meantime, please check them out. They are like full-on documents and everything that you can read, not a YouTube channel. So if you want a good read, please go check it out. I'll leave a little link in the description. Now back to Ho-Oh, there's a bit of lore that was developed but never really released, which was that Ho-Oh essentially used its spirit to effectively reignite the spiritual flames of the Pokemon that died and would become the legendary beasts. While this can be considered as a candle lighting another candle, a process that wouldn't take away anything from Ho-Oh in the process, you may also choose to interpret it as there needing to be some sort of limit. Whether that be Ho-Oh needing to recharge it, or this ability, or simply only having so much soul to give. It's not concrete lore, but it is implied lore, and I'll leave it to you as to how you wish to interpret it. Along these same lines, at least within the movies, it is associated with Marshadow, and this gets a little bit wild as I bring up more info that Boltoy had presented, which is that Marshadow was one of the individuals meant to protect the Brass Tower. Unfortunately, due to its nature and where it was not present to save the original forms of the legendary beasts or stop the flame, and in some capacity, it was meant to one day come back to even rebuild the tower. While this doesn't dramatically affect the ecosystem itself, it is an interaction to at least make note of. And of course, this means that I was wrong when I said there was no proper reason to associate Marshadow and Ho-Oh long ago, though it doesn't detract from its relation to the Tapus of Alola, who we'll talk about later. I have a massive weakness for Ho-Oh since, as I've said ad nauseum, that Pokemon Crystal was my first Pokemon game, which would also explain my love for Suicune, third favorite Pokemon of all time. Though despite this love, it seems like Ho-Oh's influence is more on people and culture than it is on the ecosystem. It is the center of worship by the Kimono sisters alongside Lugia. It is stated to grant eternal happiness, and at least in the legendary beasts, it granted a second chance to lives that were unfairly cut short. Even just looking at Ho-Oh in this lens, it brings about a great deal of attention, history, economical value in the form of festivals, and so much more. Ho-Oh is kind of like a personification of culture, the beautiful Feng Wang that it is. And that's a lot of what legendary Pokemon really are, what mythical Pokemon really are. Personifications of culture from our world and within the world of Pokemon. The Time Guardian Celebi has had a massive impact not only on the ecosystem, but timelines and universes as a whole. It is known to be the guardian of forests in which it resides and helps flourish it with incredible life. As long as it exists, it is stated that a bright and shining future awaits us. This even extends further with a gift from it, an egg from the future, which this gift has brought about a lot of speculation throughout the years. Some people believe that Celebi may be bringing new Pokemon to us from the future, but one theory that I've stuck with is the idea that it brings us another Pokemon that only appears in areas or timelines without war and strife, a Pokemon by the name of Togepi. Technically, this actually applies more to Togetic and Togekiss, but bear with me, because every time they appear, they typically only appear in areas that are only accessible after beating the main story of the games, more specifically Togekiss, meaning the primary major threat is gone and peace is restored. Alternatively, you can get a Togepi egg in Generation 2 that can be traced back to the Kimono girls, one of them being found within Ilex Forest, where the Shrine of Celebi is found. Again, this is primarily speculation, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it does make sense that Celebi would keep coming back with Togepi eggs to prove that our future is a good one. as part of affecting the ecosystem and timelines as a whole, it has brought us to the past to stop Giovanni from rejoining Team Rocket. It has actively aimed to fix anomalies in the timeline at any point, and even when it is about to die, it, or rather, the Celebi from across all timelines, will simultaneously appear to revive it as it had died, preventing it from ever dying, and effectively making Celebi an immortal guardian of peace, unless someone decides to, I don't know, eat it, because it's a shallot, essentially. But I feel bad for the sucker that tries that and gets mobbed by infinite numbers of Celebi. I have also argued that Celebi's intervention to stop Giovanni is because it has seen the timeline in which Giovanni won against Red and created Team Rainbow Rocket. Though I won't waste time here talking about that, I'd say that has a major impact. Nevertheless, Ilex Forest is where we find Celebi and its shrine, and I had not realized it until now, but the forest is literally called Ubame Forest, which is named after Ubame Oak, an evergreen oak tree native to Japan, Korea, and China that is used to produce high-quality charcoal. And that is exactly what the people of Azalea Town produce plenty of. So not only is Celebi helping a forest thrive, it's helping Azalea's economy and trade. The original Regis, I've already talked about how they were vital in terms of the Tree of the Beginning, but what do they really do outside of that movie, you ask? Well, honestly, they don't really do all that much. They have a strange past, as they were created by Regigigas, but have never served any ecological purpose otherwise. In fact, the main reason we don't know how they affect the world overall is due to humanity sealing them away. The Regis were once worshipped. I'm unsure if the latter or later two were worshipped, but they were still sealed away with great reverence. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I'm afraid of something, I'm sealing it away like Roshi with the Mafuba. I'm not doing all this glitter, glitz, and glam. Yet, each and every one of the Regis have statues. They have special locations that are their domain. And for every single one of these Pokemon, we actually find an Absol on the route that leads up to their locations. This is important to note because Absol is the Omen Pokemon. It warns both people and Pokemon of threats and a fate that must be escaped or we may not live to see another day. And here it is, standing outside of these man-made shrine prisons for these Regis. It can then be stated that at least in one era of time, all of these giants were once worshipped before humanity began to fear them for whatever reason they were feared. I suspect it's just because Big Daddy Regigigas decided he wanted his kids back and took control of them against the will of whatever trainer may have had them. Other than this though, these 5 Pokemon are more a product of their environments and the hands of Regigigas than they are shaper of the environments. At least according to our current understanding, and don't worry, we'll talk about Regigigas later. Get ready for more Pokemon that require a look at the movies to see their ecological impact as we turn to the skies and watch Latios and Latias in their high-speed glory. At least we would see that if they weren't invisible all the time. They don't even interact with other Pokemon and otherwise roam throughout the lands, but through our understanding of the Pokemon Heroes movie, we find out just how vital the lives of Latios, and by extension Latias, actually are. This is because of the great item known as the Soul Dew, an item that in the past gave the Latias a broken power boost mechanically, but also served as an item that balanced nature and protected Alto Mare from what would otherwise be a disaster so powerful that it would end the lives of all that exist within this city. The orb houses the spirit of a Latios because there are, in fact, multiple Latios and Latias, and this orb effectively acts as a natural control. It is embedded into a water fountain located within the Hidden Garden, and its sole purpose is to maintain water flow within the city of Alto Mare. Once the Soul Dew is removed from the aforementioned fountain, it is only a matter of time before all the water drains from the city. When the Soul Dew is placed into what is called the defense mechanism, a machine used by our villains of the movie, it becomes tainted as a result of overuse. Its overuse was completed through controlling the waters all around the city and even reviving fossils, all likely due to the sheer amount of life energy that is contained within the orb. And once a person touches the Soul Dew while it's in its fragile state, it will then disintegrate, which then causes the defense mechanism to go berserk. Really doesn't sound like a defense mechanism, sounds like an attack mechanism, a chaos mechanism, literally anything but defense. And I'll be honest, there are some villains that deserve to never see the light of day again. The villains in this movie deserve to stay trapped in the machine they created and rot, in my personal opinion. Because by the end of this, the only way to resolve the issue is for Latios to give its free life up and transform permanently into another Soul Dew. Latias gets the vibe afterwards, don't really get to know what happens to her, but I assume she'll find another Latias or Latios somewhere out there in the world, since they both do appear later on in the franchise, even though we don't know for sure if they're the same exact ones every single time they appear. Now, their ecological effect seems more about stability and control, at least within Alto Mare. There are no other significant areas in which they ever really appear. When you clicked on this video, despite the Pokemon I have on the thumbnail, you likely thought of Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza as three of some of the most major players in regards to how ecosystems function or change, and you are absolutely correct in this thought. These three formed the world as we know it, and I mean quite literally, because it is through the water that Kyogre creates, the land and superheated core that Groudon makes, and the atmosphere that Rayquaza forms from the battles that occur between the other two, that we get three of the major necessary components for life to exist on a planet, and I mean that in real life. Kyogre began life in its primal form, creating entire oceans by taking a swim throughout the world, which technically, since Kyogre can literally fly, it may as well have flown through the world as it created the oceans and expanded the seas. It created massive rainstorms to cloak the world's sky and brought about tidal waves as water bathed the planet in a home for all of our fishy friends soon to come. In opposition to this, we have Groudon, who is the personification or Pokemonification of the land itself, while also bearing control over the land's volcanoes, while being capable of summoning intense sunlight. And through this mixture of heat, sunlight, and lava, or rather magma, do we get the evaporation of water and the expansion of land. Just as we talked about with volcanoes earlier, Groudon, causing eruptions, is what causes these land masses to form underneath its feet. The heat it has within its primal form even causes the air itself to shimmer thanks to the difference in density and water molecules. So we can begin to see how this expansion of water and land clashes with each other, how the constant heating and cooling alongside the release of steam into the air can then cause immense changes within the climate. This is exactly why the two of them clashing is immensely cataclysmic, because independently they already can change the climate, but together they cause a chaos unlike almost any other. Even within animation, Kyogre is shown being able to cause entire twisters to appear by itself, while Groudon is basically vomiting up blasts of lava and erasing entire islands. The scariest part of all of this is that in lore, the two of them are stated to be perfectly evenly matched, meaning that their battle will go on until the world itself gives up, and this is exactly why Rayquaza has to step in. With a singular roar, we have seen Rayquaza put an end to their squabbles, and even when the two of them reached a higher level within their primal forms than what they ever achieved in the past, Rayquaza simply mega evolved in the modern day and tore them apart. Though I have been speculating for over a year now that Rayquaza was granted this transformation through the wish of the Draconids and Jirachi. I won't talk about that here. Instead, I'll talk about the sheer impact of Rayquaza on the ecosystem. Because with Rayquaza living in the atmosphere, there's one detail that is left out, because I'm betting you haven't read the Pokemon Adventures manga, and you should fix that. But, and this detail is, Rayquaza literally releases ozone as it flies. The atmosphere dragon generates the very substance that is hard to recreate and acts as the lovely barrier between us being fried by the sun and us simply getting a little sunburn from staying outside for a little too long. The atmosphere and its overall quality are of course far more complicated than that, but that's the basis of it and one of the qualities it does have. How much sunlight and heat gets through kind of depends on it amongst many other factors, which that in turn changes how hot the planet is, how acidified the waters of the world become due to heat, and so much more. I mean, poor little Corsola has even gotten a Galarian form that is representative of bleached coral due to climate change that is directly noted within its Pokédex. There is no escaping the science of climate change in your funny little fantasy world, and you will not be allowed to ignore it, especially not in my videos. Now, Rayquaza, of course, goes above and beyond, quite literally goes into space, you know, with all of this, because it can summon cyclones, it can manipulate the weather, eliminate weather effects overall, and spears its body through massive Earth-threatening meteors to keep the planet safe, and then continues to fight aggressive space viruses afterwards, or aggressive mutated space viruses afterwards. Now, this Pokemon, whose Mega is stated to have literally been born from humanity's wish for salvation, hint hint, is easily one of the most powerful and key Pokemon for the ecosystem of the entire planet, and life within the world of Pokemon would not have existed if it didn't help the development of the planet and its atmosphere ever since the first clash of Kyogre and Groudon. Let me hear it in the comments for one of our keystone species Pokemon, Rayquaza. It deserves all the hype it gets. Now, before we do continue, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, you're likely in it for the long haul, so please make sure you subscribe and leave a little comment about your favorite legendary or mythical Pokemon. I love reading the comments, and it is through comments and watch time that you help boost the reach of a video best, freely, as told by YouTube itself. If you would like to go the extra mile, please become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month and get perks such as seeing videos early and hearing your name at the end credits of every single video. It goes a long way for helping keep the channel alive and even making improvements towards the quality of videos. But again, thank you, and back to the video. Our adorable little wish Pokemon, and arguably one of my top favorite mythical Pokemon, Jirachi, may have a greater hand in the ecosystem than we'd expect, though it's definitely hard to actually prove. Let's lay the pieces out and we'll see if you agree with me. For starters, Jirachi sleeps for 1,000 years, you know, a little nap, wakes up, parties long enough to grant some wishes, then goes back to night-night. Then there's the Millennium Comet, a comet that appears every 1,000 years, of course. This celestial rock also provides Jirachi with energy through its third eye, which is then released over the course of a millennium to keep balance within the Pokemon world, or so they say within the Pokemon Jirachi Wishmaker movie. But another odd occurrence is that 2,000 years ago, a meteor fell from the heavens and threatened the lives of all Pokemon within the Lental region, which is Switch's Pokemon Snap, or rather just Pokemon Snap in general. Then, 1,000 years ago, another meteor fell, which caused an impact that allowed the release of primal energy across the lands for Kyogre and Groudon. And finally, 1,000 years later, now in the modern day, we have yet another meteor that came falling down onto the planet that we had to stop through the Delta episode. So I don't know what it is about meteors, and while I would like to assume the Millennial Comet is not what these meteors are, it feels as though they are definitely related, whether it's a broken off piece or they are the same thing. Either way, it's made very clear the effect that Jirachi has with the ecosystem with its connection through space, essentially serving as a conduit for the balance of energy within the world. And maybe it is related to the main meteor that comes falling down, which makes it that much more intertwined. Either way, we might assume that the energy that it shares is life energy, and we can move on. Though, since we're on the topic of space, we can now talk about Deoxys, who is honestly removed from the ecosystem of the planet. It's a virus that exists inside of meteors, and while I've loved theories surrounding it, as I mentioned in my most recent Kalos Mysteries video, you should go watch it, Deoxys itself isn't part of our ecosystem. The closest we can get to it is knowing that Rayquaza will chase after Deoxys no matter where it is on the planet and blast him. But other than that, it's pretty unclear what Deoxys even wants most of the time other than to return to space. So, big shocker, the virus from space isn't really a part of the ecosystem, and we can move on once more. Now that we're in Generation 4, it gets a bit arbitrary with how some of the ones here affect the ecosystem, but bear with me because once again, it is about how Pokemon interact with each other and the environment, and the Lake Guardians have had a massive impact. It is through these Guardians that emotion, knowledge, and willpower were granted to humanity as a whole. In fact, there are legends that if Azelf is harmed, that all of humanity would just lose their willpower and become immobile for all of eternity. That's not scary, and nothing like this seems to ever be stated for our other two Pokemon, but I imagine there would be a very similar effect, and that idea alone is terrifying. Though it is very important to note that this effect only happens to humans, or this gift that is granted happened to humans, not Pokemon. For whatever reason, these Pokemon in their creation did not grant these 3 gifts to other Pokemon, but rather just to humanity. Likely because these gifts already were pre-installed to all Pokemon, for lack of a better term. As for the locations that we find them in, it gets a little strange, because at least within Hisui, they are first protected by alpha Pokemon, and then test us in their own way before granting us parts of themselves to help create the Red Chain. The same chain that can be used to control Dialga and Palkia, but not Giratina, almost as if it were a failsafe in case someone used them for evil, like Cyrus. Now, Mesprit may be roaming Sinnoh, but it is also found within the Celestial Tower of Unova, a place that is associated with death, space, and the heavens. This is exemplified by the place being aligned with graves, and the population changing from entirely Litwick early on, and eventually changing to Elgium at the top. This is very fitting, as Mesprit taught sorrow, pain, and joy, all things we can associate with life and death, the grieving, and the resolution of our emotions when somebody passes. With Uxie, it is the being of knowledge, so of course one of the only other places we find it in is within Nacrene City, where the greatest museum and library are within Unova. This museum having housed a stone for the legendary dragons. But not only this, but Uxie likely has a heavy attraction towards human libraries because they are a place of teaching, just as Uxie taught humans the ability to solve problems with their knowledge, something we have to do within the gym in order to battle Lenora. Plus, within Sinnoh, it literally had information on Arceus, or at least the library there, and the past of Sinnoh when it was once called Hisui. So, Uxie might be curious as to what humanity has figured out with the gift it granted them. Then there's Azelf being found on Route 23 within Kalos. This is a bit dangerously close to where Kyurem is, but this route is also noted to be a mountain path of no return with overwhelming cliffs. In other words, a challenge that must be overcome through pure willpower, perfect for what Azelf represents. The effect that these Pokemon have are very direct, but far-reaching in the aftermath of what they've done. It's hard to really say they affect the ecosystem itself, but without them, humanity would not exist as it does, and we would not have affected the ecosystem as we do. Along these same lines, we have the Origin Trio with Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, and while I could go on and on about time, space, and antimatter, I think I can cut straight to the heart of this one and talk about what I see as the most direct and important piece. Giratina and the Distortion World, a place that has been described as the Mirror World and has even served as a form of afterlife within the Pokemon Adventures manga. But when we stop thinking of Giratina as a villain, and we stop thinking of Distortion World as hell, we begin to realize that this is less of a place of punishment and more of a place of balance or rebirth. Within the Giratina and the Sky Warrior movie, we learn that Giratina's world lies in opposite to ours as a mirror world. There are bubbles that exist within the realm that, when touched, will cause what are effectively explosions in our world in perfect position to where they were in the mirror world. Not only this, but we also learn that the clashing that has occurred between Dialga and Palkia has effectively caused gaseous clouds to appear within the Distortion World. These are effectively poisonous and will quickly kill anyone who breathes it in. Now, with both of these concepts in mind, we can talk about the fact that Giratina represents antimatter, a substance that has existed in equal and opposite amounts to matter since the very beginning. It is theorized in the real world that the Big Bang may have even occurred thanks to a large clutter of matter and antimatter suddenly existing and meeting with each other. And when these two things meet, there's an explosion that occurs. This explosion is translated through what we first understand to be the explosive temperaments that Giratina has with Dialga and Palkia, or really even the temperament that they all have with each other, as they are all meant to stay away from each other, or else the universe is stated that it may unravel, probably because of all their fighting. So in truth, Giratina within the movie was attacking Dialga because of the damage that it and Palkia had caused. Giratina was prepared to fully murder both the gods of time and space, because if Giratina didn't, then the Distortion World will fall to ruin. Plus, Arceus can kind of just create another one of any of the three at will anyway, so who cares? Now, If the distortion world dies, then so too will our world, and from there, we can suspect that the universe will simply crumple in on itself and cease to exist, making Arceus restart the entire process, as life and death would no longer exist, nor would time and space. Oops. Giratina is one of the most misunderstood Pokemon of all, and honestly, I might just need to make an entire analysis video on just it, but I'll save that for the future. All that you need to know is that Giratina's protection of the Distortion realm and how it intervenes when Cyrus controls Dialga and Palkia makes it a hero time and time again, minus the one time it's sided with Volo, which makes it very confusing once more, but I'm not going to talk about that here. I hope you aren't tired of talking about volcanoes, because we get to discuss the strange Pokemon that is Heatran. While Groudon may be able to control magma and is out there creating continents willy-nilly, it is Heatran who is believed to be the embodiment of the planet's boiling core. This gets a bit weird because our core is solid with a liquid outer shell, but what I assume then is Heatran is literally that, the outer shell. This would explain the more magma-themed body that has little inclusions of metal and magma alongside the more solidified metallic head, representing that only part of it is solidified and placing it right under the domain of Groudon. There are many Heatran, all born from the boiling magma within volcanic mountains, such as with Mount Coronet and Reversal Mountain. Though there is also the Magma Stone, something that sits upon an altar that is heavily guarded by this Pokemon, and for good reason. Not only does removing the stone cause Heatran to go into a rampage and for the volcano to erupt due to this Magma Stone being what we can assume is key to preventing disaster, but also this stone can also be used to control Heatran. Because of all of these reasons, it makes sense as to why Heatran would be so determined to absolutely eviscerate any would-be intruders of the volcano. To gain the power of the volcano is a terrifying concept that we've tied to many other Pokemon, legendary and common. And despite having a type combination shared by no other Pokemon, unless Legends ZA changes that, a type combination with the most double resistances, Heatran doesn't have any alternate forms and has almost no lore outside of what we've talked about. Though, at the end of the day, its control over the volcano's eruption helps prevent lives from being unnecessarily lost. The lands in which it lives in has a flowing ecosystem that produces wheezing from the fumes of the volcano. There are Rhydon and Camerupt eating grass in the fields and occasionally fighting with each other over territory and food. And even Skarmory flies overhead to clean up the lands when a Pokemon does finally fall. And it might attack a Teddiursa or a Spinda or whatever the heck else it wants to eat, honestly. It's a Skarmory, who's going to stop it? Now, you may also find Slugma and Magcargo within the mountain caves, but depending on the mountain, you may even find Ghost and Psychic type Pokemon. This further establishes the connection of mountains and being closer to the heavens, but that only makes me a bit more confused as to how Heatran has been placed at such important places consistently and has yet to ever receive any of that extra love that it honestly deserves. Nevertheless, the ash that comes down from the volcanoes enriches the land while Heatran prevents it from erupting. Sure, there may be some lung and breathing problems for creatures not adapted to live in the environment, but that's just how the world works anyway. All the while, the volcano once again serves as a perfect example of an extreme environment that collects Pokemon that are specifically adapted towards living in or around it. A volcano that, while not erupting, provides a great outwardly heat to the area around it. Big Daddy Regigigas, the continent mover itself that has been worshipped in the past and has been another major source of changes within the world of Pokemon. Because, let's break down all the Pokemon I can basically guarantee it has directly affected. I was really tempted to just say, like, all of them and move on, which would be really funny, but really anticlimactic. But the first one that comes to mind is always Terapagos for me. This is because when seismic shifts occurred, Terapagos and its kind fall through the cracks and are claimed to be extinct. I don't believe they're all extinct, but that's a whole other theory for a whole other video. But with only one of their kind currently known to be left and alive, and continental movement being considered a seismic shift, there's a very good chance that Gigas here may have caused Terapagos' extinction. Oops. Then I would also like to point us towards the dinosaurs, more specifically Tyrantrum, who is of course based on the big old T-Rex. and despite both being called the kings of the dino world, they were not distributed throughout the entire world. In fact, both the real T-Rex and Tyrantrum are noted to have been in different areas from our long-necked sauropods, which are represented by Aurorus. But how could that be? Well, at least in the real world, before the continents could completely separate, there was a land bridge that the T-Rex looked at for some reason and said, "Oh man, guess I gotta cross it. It'd be kind of rude of me not to." And so massive amounts of T-Rex who are thought to move in packs all crossed together. That's like the super simplified version of it, but with this in mind, we can understand that Regigigas has affected the lives of Tyrantrum and where they've been distributed. This, of course, can be said for many other Pokemon, but this is a great case example to explain. It was specifically noted as well, Regigigas, to have pulled the landmasses together. And while it doesn't state that it did so multiple times, I feel that it is pretty safe to assume as much. This would then allow us to include every continental shift that has occurred because there's more than Pangea Ultima, baby. The reason I'd want to bring or include this idea is because then it brings into a theory that the lands of Pokemon Conquest are the lands of some of our major regions before they split, being our Pangea Ultima, a land that was created by Arceus in its image and then eventually split apart. Each culture drifting, people and their Pokemon separating, and a history that is somehow lost. Definitely messes with the continuity a bit, unless we add some sort of major cataclysm, but oh well, it's Pokemon. They break rules all the time, so who cares? Except I do, because I want to know lore. Of course, then, once Regigigas laid itself down to take a nap in its fancy little temple that people built to it, they sealed it away, which I find very strange that Gigas didn't just burst out, but I suppose it was just happily napping undisturbed until we came in, woke it up, and then it was ready to fight us because it didn't understand anything else that was going on. You can't talk about Cresselia without talking about Darkrai. These Pokemon represent the crescent moon and the new moon, the duo of dreams and nightmares, and effectively two Pokemon that may represent gods in their own right once more. Laventon specifically notes that Cresselia resembles the heavenly maiden who created the Milky Way, and while I doubt that would have been done by Cresselia, it's interesting to note that he's potentially talking about Hera of Greek mythology. When her breast milk spilt across the heavens, once she awoke to a surprise nursing Hercules, it created the Milky Way itself. And while Cresselia isn't tied to marriage, family, and childbirth, it seems as if the world of Pokemon has an inclination towards stating that children have happier dreams all the time, which could be an effect of Cresselia. And of course, the source for pure good dreams would be her, which this in turn creates food for Pokemon like Drowsy and Munna, who prefer to eat good dreams. Though there's a really funny, quote-unquote, detail where you can save a man's son from an endless nightmare through the use of a lunar feather from Cresselia. And what is that man's name? Eldritch. You know, like an eldritch abomination creating an endless nightmare for someone to lose their mind within. This is not his Japanese name, though. His Japanese name is actually Namiki, which is derived from Nami for wave. Oh my gosh, it's a One Piece reference. But other names are derived from fear, last, and elf in Italian, which I have no idea what the Italians are doing with the name translation on that one, but you go, girl. But because of this, we do get to talk about the darkest of nights, when the moon disappears and no light sheds upon our Earth, a night of fear and darkness that coalesces into the form of Darkrai, or at least our idea of fear is now created, and then we represent that through Darkrai. And once again, Darkrai is fairly misunderstood, but that's kind of its own fault at this point. In some stories, it is majorly antagonistic, while in others, it just wants people to fall asleep so they don't hunt it down or get too scared by it. Sometimes it's friends with Cresselia, sometimes it isn't, but without one, you cannot have the other. And without Darkrai, there is at least one specific Pokemon that may have a harder time evolving. Shuppet would be this Pokemon, one that consumes the negative emotions from others and is apt to do so while people sleep, which leaves them refreshed when they do wake up. And while it doesn't say so directly, it can be assumed that with enough energy absorbed, this is one way for it to evolve into Banette. Now, these two Pokemon, Darkrai, Cresselia, are very strange admittedly, but they still have a greater effect on the world since dreams and nightmares are consumable, tangible things. They're also technically entirely visitable since we have the Dreamworlds to enter. This makes their influence even grander when we know that thanks to the manga, every single Pokemon that falls asleep will visit the Dreamworld. This would also be the place where Zekrom and Reshiram rest when they are in their stone forms. We as humans have to use special means in order to even enter this dimension, but it is otherwise a collection of floating islands connected by rainbows with homes for the Pokemon that live there, a little miniature paradise. It's hard to judge how this next part really works, but through spending time in the world, there are ways to bring things into our dimension from the dream world and even cause Pokemon to level up while they are in this dream world, showing us that there's far more at play than we realize and deepening Cresselia and Darkrai's influence. At the end of the day though, within our own dimension, if these two aren't roaming the world, they're resting on their Crescent Island and New Moon Island, which has no other Pokemon on it besides them. I suppose being too close to either of them for too long may result in some unknown effect. At least with Darkrai, we know it might keep us trapped in that eternal nightmare. Meanwhile, maybe we just stay in a happy slumber with Cresselia forever. The answer is unknown. Manaphy and Phione, Pokemon that are inspired by the adorable and only marginally terrifying Sea Angel. They're Sea Guardians with the titles of Sea Faring for Manaphy and Sea Drifter for Phione. The more I look into this for every video I bring these two Pokemon up, it only makes me more and more sense that Phione will eventually grow up to become Manaphy over a long period of time, but that's not our focus here. Instead, our focus is on the unique moves that these Pokemon have. Take Heart and Heart Swap, which I kind of forget that Phione has Take Heart for a move, and I just kind of imagine it grabbing someone's heart and just ripping it out, just like, but with Take Heart, it lifts the user's spirits, heals status conditions, and raises its offensive and defensive stats, which this does no damage whatsoever and made me double take because the real name of this move is actually Brave Charge, you know, like charging up. Meanwhile, for Manaphy and Heart Swap, this special power that it is born with allows it to bond with any Pokemon. It allows it to switch the perspectives of people and Pokemon with each other, then allowing a proper understanding of different perspectives in their entirety. We're not talking swapping eyeballs here, we're talking literal cognition and emotional awareness, baby. Manaphy forces you to take a walk in someone else's shoes and you will understand how they feel. Phione's ability is that of a child that is growing up, needing to be brave and swim around the world in order to understand it. Meanwhile, Manaphy is that of the sage, a Pokemon who has seen all and can help others properly get along and understand one another. This would then allow Manaphy to shape Pokemon and human relations, even shape the relationships between Pokemon and each other. And this can quell quarrels over territory and food, it can bring larger groups of Pokemon together, and so much more. But as much as it affects others, these Pokemon are greatly affected by their environments as well. This is because at least Manaphy is noted to be 80% water, causing it to be easily affected by its environment. Cue up every single instance we've talked about within acidification of water, global warming, and abundance of food, because now you have a mythical Pokemon that this now affects with ease, or is affected by. I kind of realized I've failed to explain that ecosystems, while often interconnected, can be rather small or incredibly large. We could make a micro ecosystem that is just bacteria, or maybe plants. We can study an ecosystem of a savanna and how prey and predators interact with each other. We can even have a long-term examination of an ecosystem, and it is incredibly important to study short and long-term ecosystems alongside tiny and massive ones, all because, again, of just how connected they really are. And even if only one creature is affected, it is part of the ecosystem, which before we do go, I do have to mention that Phione does use camouflage as its main defense mechanism to blend in with the water and not be noticed by predators while it searches for food itself. What is this food, you may ask? Well, it's likely plankton and other microorganisms, considering it is based on that sea angel as I mentioned. Now, as for what eats sea angels, this would be some fish, jellies, birds, and the most common consumer being baleen whales. I would be worried about Manaphy hanging around Wailord, but with that little heart swap ability, everyone just gets to be a friend. Alright, I'm actually very excited to talk about Shaymin because for the longest time, it was just a Pokemon. I thought it was cute and didn't make an impact on me. Like, it was literally just, yeah, that's a cute Pokemon. Moving on. But now we can take it in the ecological sense. We can realize just how impactful it actually is, or impactful. Because this Pokemon, representing gratitude alongside the Gracidia flower, is a major player within any place it may visit. Shaymin has the unique quality to be able to purify any air that it comes into contact with. This is, of course, an extreme version of plants taking in carbon dioxide, and through means of also taking in sunlight and water through photosynthesis to create their energy, they create oxygen and sugar. And funny enough, while plants do use oxygen to help break down sugars for energy, as well as other necessary processes, they produce so much oxygen that when you balance it out, plants are creating more oxygen than they are using. Thus, they release it. Now, what if we took all of this oxygen and all of this energy produced through photosynthesis and released it in one massive burst instead of slowly over time? That, my friend, is how we get the move Seed Flare. But instead of just carbon dioxide, Shaymin purifies any polluted area of all impurities in the air and transforms it into a lush field of flowers. It takes in the polluted air, purifies it inside of its body, breaks it down into water and light, and then releases the purified substance in a violent, explosive burst. Its power varies based on the type of pollution absorbed. Again, we take photosynthesis and crank it up to the max, which has resulted in entire forests being blown away, or even ripping a hole through space and time in order to escape from Giratina's realm due to the pollution that was there from Dialga and Palkia's clash. It does make me wonder what was creating such heavy pollution in the forest, but it was likely legitimate deforestation. To quickly explain that, deforestation is not just chopping down a tree or two, it's removing massive chunks of forests, of course. And places like the Amazon rainforest are continuing to be absolutely destroyed by humanity, which in turn is creating what is called a carbon sink. Because, surprise, when a tree dies and decays, or literally anything for that matter, of course a ton of carbon dioxide is released. And when you chop down a ton of trees, create a ton of that CO2, and that gas is not being absorbed faster than it is being created, congratulations! You, my enemy, have turned a forest from a machine that creates oxygen into a machine that is effectively a carbon sink, a place where more carbon is being produced than oxygen, which then, of course, will then turn to lower air quality. And that will help create health problems for every creature that breathes. Thanks. Now, I would not be surprised if this was the case for Shaymin and the forest that it was in, but there's more, as its species exhibits a behavior called flower carrying. This is the case in which their species gather within a flower field somewhere and migrates from there into new areas, causing flowers to grow wherever it lands. These places are typically places with a lot of gratitude, as that is what they are attracted to. And while it is shown that they carry Gracidia flowers, it is implied that they help carry other flowers around as well, spreading flowering plant species throughout the world and helping those species stay alive. This isn't the only case of grass types spreading plant seeds of different plants than what they are inspired by, and helps us understand how important grass Pokemon are to a world with such powerful and hungry creatures. Of course, the mighty hand of Arceus would have an effect on the ecosystem. It built it through the creation of other Pokemon and overseeing the universe, and even multiverse as we know it. But there's something special here that I want to mention. While even Arceus tries not to directly intervene, instead doing things like sending people into the lands of Hisui in order to do its work for them, there are a couple of other instances that greatly influence how the world is shaped and functioned over long periods of time. We're going to be talking about instances in which the plates of Arceus were used to save humanity, seal away a Pokemon, and even grants power to those who wield the plates themselves. The first two are instances that do occur within movies. Arceus and the Jewel of Life shows how Arceus created the Jewel of Life through the use of its plates in order to grant Machina Town with rich and fertile land, saving it from the desolate zone that it once was. This was done in thanks for Arceus being saved after protecting the world from a meteor's impact, and while yes, the one true unnamed Arceus cannot be harmed, we assume, the fragments of Arceus can be, the actual Pokemon themselves that you and I know. Now, this jewel cannot be broken, and it does not need to stay in the lands forever, apparently, in order to keep the positive effect that it has brought. But even within this one direct instance, we understand a key effect Arceus has had. Now, along these same lines, in Arch Valley, the people were saved by Arceus as it used its plates once more to seal away Hoopa in its unbound state. A powerful threat as it could summon and control legendary Pokemon of all kinds and not limited to the Kalos Dragons and the Origin Trio. This not only trapped Hoopa, but limits its power to only be fully unleashed for a maximum of 3 days. Unless, of course, the prison bottle is somehow destroyed or something, which totally shouldn't happen since it's made from the plates of Arceus, right? Right? Wrong, because it's absolutely something that gets destroyed in the movie and has to be recreated. This is probably because instead of it being entirely created by Arceus, a man by the name of Gris had used the plates of Arceus to create it. These legendaries and their loopholes, man. Nevertheless, these plates hold a great effect on the world as a whole, because even if we go to the very beginning, they state, even within the games, that the power of giants were infused into these plates. Whether that be other legendary Pokemon born alongside Arceus, or something else entirely is still very unclear, but they have appeared within the games everywhere. They are spread throughout the world, sometimes within major locations, such as the Abyssal Ruins or with alpha Pokemon, and are stated to only reside with those that are the rightful bearers. These rightful bearers, we might assume, have shaped the world as we know it. They may be Pokemon, they may be world leaders, but one thing we know for sure is that without additional hands of Arceus here, things would be far different. Pokemon number 0 is next, our Goddess of Victory, Victini. Now, these mythical Pokemon are harder to understand, their ecological impact as always, but we're gonna try. Residing on Liberty Garden, it is stated to be an island that is a symbol of hope for a world where humans and Pokemon live free. Very fitting for a Pokemon that can generate an infinite amount of energy and guarantee victory to whatever side it exists on. There would be horrible ramifications to Victini being on the side of evil, so of course it has to be on this island for freedom and hope, or else we'd be living in Giovanni's world real fast, which explains why Team Plasma tries to capture it. In fact, according to the Adventures manga, people who believed in the legends of Victini would wage war to get their hands on this Pokemon. After all, what are a few lives lost if it means that you can have what is thought to be absolute victory for eternity? I'm not justifying it, I'm just saying I understand why people would desire Victini as part of their team. But the limitations of Victini are never truly explained. I would like to assume that it couldn't defeat Arceus or other Pokemon who represent the fabric of reality, but we don't know. So as such, Victini is arguably another Pokemon removed from the ecosystem, though it does love macaroons, which is adorable, and of course I can't help but edit that in every single time I talk about it. Another case that is more specific are the Swords of Justice, and we'll include Keldeo as part of this as well. These original 3 Pokemon became legendary during a time within Unova where war broke out between 2 opposing groups of people. Through this war, Pokemon were put at risk of losing their lives as they were caught in the middle of it. They were used as tools, and there were many casualties, and it was the forest fire on the Moor of Icarus that was the last straw. From here, the Swords of Justice earned their name. They challenged humans in order to protect Pokemon from the war and from the ceaseless, uncaring expansion of humanity that would destroy the homes of innocent creatures and nature itself. The 3 would gain a great distrust of humans overall and continue to serve other Pokemon, with Keldeo being one Pokemon that was separated from its parents within the movie. It would be saved from the forest fire on Icarus and eventually become one of the Swords of Justice itself. They also have a weird relation to Kyurem in the movie, because Keldeo fails to defeat the dragon at first, the swords are then frozen, and then Keldeo comes back with enough power to then win, and Kyurem isn't treated like a threat. Instead, it even saves our protagonists after losing the fight when they were almost crushed by the environment after Keldeo won. The movies get a little strange if you didn't know, but they should never be ignored, just taken with a grain of salt in terms of how lore actually works as a whole. Clearly though, without the original Swords of Justice, the Moor of Icarus, which is a place higher up on land with higher rainfall, would not exist. So I don't know how that fire started, but humanity was definitely doing some heinous things during that time. Now, Pokemon that require moist environments do survive here, such as Shelmet and Barboach, and down south, we would find Route 8 that is considered a marshy swamp, the swamp likely being a product of the moor, granting an extended home to the Pokemon that we mentioned. Imagine, if you would, in this one instance, the number of Pokemon that would not have homes if the swords did not intervene within this war. Imagine which would be extinct. And then imagine what other places these legendary Pokemon visited alongside the mythical Keldeo and the greater effect that they have. It is more than just a few Pokemon or one environment. Their effects stretch further into other routes and beyond what we would be able to see, as without Pokemon like Shaymin, Karrablast would struggle to survive as well, affecting the bird population that eats this little beetle, creating a chain effect over time, and eventually bringing out even more extinctions or mass migrations of Pokemon. I'm going to discuss the Genie Quartet as a whole because not only are they also representative of the seasons, the effects that they have extend greatly through each other, Pokemon, and humanity as a whole. These were once Pokemon that were deeply worshipped and feared for what they could do, because while Tornadus and Thundurus would bring about great wind and storms that would ravage the environment, it would be Landorus who floats in to stop the fighting and even grants a plentiful harvest. And they do kind of shoot around between a bunch of different regions. More specifically though, Thundurus tends to cause forest fires whenever it flies around shooting lightning. Its lightning bolts can enrich the soil of any ground it hits, though any area visited by it is marked by charred remains of areas it destroyed. From here, we'd go from strong storms and great rain into the harvest season, which is when Landorus fits in, considering the guardian of the fields, or rather considered the guardian of the fields, due to helping crops grow. It had the title of God of Fields in Hisui due to it bringing life to the region alongside Enamorus. Its tail causes the soil to gain nutrition. The energy from the tail is also created by combining lightning and wind, the exact two things that Tornadus and Thundurus represent and control with their own great power. So while it seems disjointed and harmful, the original trio already works together to bring food to the world and renew the soils to ensure harvests can be enjoyed each year. And what comes with a plentiful harvest or a plentiful amount of food? Babies! And I'm not even joking, there are only 2 times when any creature has a ton of babies. When there is nothing else to do, which is how the baby boomers were created, and the other time being when there are bountiful harvests. Oh, we have extra food? Well, that means my significant other can grow an entirely new life within their belly, since they'll get plenty of extra energy from eating the extra food we do have. This is of course how and why Enamorus comes in, and while I hate Enamorus within the games for personal reasons, I love the Pokemon that is the love-hate Pokemon in its inspiration and purpose, or rather, I really like it. Saying I love it is pretty strong, it's not even my top 50, I'd say. Either way, Enamorus is known as the Herald of Spring and God of Spring. The reason is that it arrived from the sea into Hisui, and its love was said to have given rise to fresh life in it, or within that region. This usually signals the end of winter and the rise of the spring season, as it does not like the cold. And when it is in its turtle snake form, it will dole out ruthless punishment towards anyone who treats any form of life with disrespect. We truly do have our Pokemon of fertility here, and I am not talking about soil. Jokes aside though, these Pokemon aren't just the seasons, they are the attributes that we as humanity have placed upon the seasons. Frigid winter storms with Tornadus, the warmth of spring's arrival and renewal of life with Enamorus, the powerful storms of summer in Thundurus, and the bountiful harvest of Landorus. Yin, Yang, Wuji, the Tau Trio makes their entry onto the scenes of Unova, and I'll be honest, Reshiram and Zekrom are very direct in how they affect things, then they go eep. To explain, Reshiram and Zekrom were stated to have brought ruin to the lands of Unova. Through lightning and fire, together they fuel each other's abilities, their powers, their destruction. They were once a singular Pokemon after all, and their engines drive each other. But outside of this power, there is no direct understanding as to what they may have done. Though, I always like to say that there's always a grain of truth to a myth or tale told by others. In this case, we have the desert that surrounds the Relic Castle. This castle has always held Volcarona and people before even they passed away, likely because Volcarona burned up all the oxygen and turned them into Yamask, but oh well, what can you do when the world outside is turned into a barren wasteland? It would make clear sense that Reshiram would have burned the world outside, as its Lightstone is found here, the dormant form of Reshiram. This would explain where the ability to burn the world would come from, as it states in its dex, especially in olden days, as people would think that their home is all that there is in the world. Though this is definitely only a singular piece to a much greater puzzle. And at least within the manga, these two Pokemon are shown to enter the Dreamworld when in their dormant state, and you can accidentally get sucked into their stones and brought into said dream dimension, which is a little bit scary if the dragon doesn't want to wake back up for, a couple thousand years, just a casual nap. So we have speculation that Reshiram and Zekrom may have created the desert surrounding Relic Castle, which of course gives homes to many Pokemon, and by the events of Black 2, White 2, it provides a home for humanity again. But we do have a more solidified example of how the ecosystem is affected through Kyurem, one of the big three on today's thumbnail. For you see, when you approach the giant chasm, things become far colder. This is due to the sheer power of absolute zero that Kyurem holds, that Wuji, freezing more than just its immediate surroundings and extending its tendrils into the surrounding routes. For clarification, Wuji doesn't necessarily mean cold or anything like that. It's just a fun way to interpret Kyurem's powers and how they relate to Wuji. Now, this place may have a few Poliwag or Basculin Pokemon that somehow managed to make some sort of living here. I mean, Basculin technically can turn into Basculegion, which is more of a salmon, and they can survive in a little bit of a colder environment, but whatever. The environment here provides one of the only locations in the entirety of Pokemon where Pokemon such as Metagross, Mamoswine, and Vanillux can be naturally encountered. In fact, this is the only place where you can currently get all three at once. They are all Pokemon that require incredibly cold temperatures in order to thrive, Mamoswine literally being an otherwise extinct Pokemon were it not for these unique environments. And you might be confused as to how Metagross needs cold to survive or come into existence, and allow me to explain. The entire line of Metagross is composed of magnets and exude incredible magnetic force. And only through overcoming these magnetic forces can they attach to each other and evolve. In real life, the cold actually allows magnets to have more power, and so Metang find themselves here in order to reach their next level of magnetic power and become Metagross. There are of course other Pokemon here such as Clefable, Lunatone, and Solrock that represent the potential of Kyurem coming from the heavens, and even though that's been stated to be disproven, or space, not heavens, getting them mixed up, there's some strange stuff going on here, but again, I will not be talking about that here. Instead, I'll note that we also get to see Dugong here as one of our other Pokemon who absolutely loves the cold, as we've discussed, and little old Delibird amongst a couple of other icy Pokemon. Overall, this makes Kyurem's contribution of freezing cold to the environment just as important of a niche environment as any other, and it is easily one of my favorite locations in all of Pokemon games to talk about because of what we see here. Two more Pokemon that are strangely removed from the ecosystem include Meloetta and Genesect, because of course Genesect is a creature long extinct, now brought back by Team Plasma, and doesn't really have a place anymore in the modern ecosystem. If anything, it's an invasive species, especially with all the new tech on its back. Meanwhile, with Meloetta, it has a similar effect to what the Lake Guardians had, instead bringing beautiful music and dance that inspired many works of art and music throughout humanity. I'd like to think of Meloetta as a lower deity under Mesprit, who is literally a lake god, as it's mentioned in direct translation, but we can thank this attachment that I have in my head between Mesprit and Meloetta to the attachment of emotion to the ideas that music are, or is, which it does have a strange ability to also be used to help control the three original Genie Pokemon with the assistance of the Reveal Glass, but that puts Meloetta in an incredible amount of pain. The only thing I can really draw from here, though, is that in the Blueberry Academy, you can encounter it within the coastal biome, which just makes me think of somebody singing out to the sea as a way for someone or something to return to them. We're getting into Kalos, and I recorded all of this before the release of Legends CA, which I am live streaming like a madman, and you should join along with those live streams here on YouTube. If you see a little red ring around my profile, come join, come say hi. I like talking to y'all. But I say this because part of what I say will lead into predictions that regard how these Pokemon affect the greater world as a whole before I even get to play the game. Now, let's get started with the Aura Trio: Xerneas, Yveltal, and Zygarde. 3 Pokemon that represent the flow of life and the balance of it. For Xerneas gives life, Yveltal takes life, and Zygarde serves as a medium that can take either of the other 2 Pokemon down and rebalance the scales if they're ever thrown out of whack. Man, it's almost like it sounds very, very similar to another certain red, blue, and green trio that we talked about earlier. I wonder if Zygarde and Rayquaza will finally meet each other, especially since AZ is so intrinsically tied to both of them, but that is neither here nor there. Instead, let's begin with the shortest bit of info we have on any of the 3, being Yveltal, a being who unfurls wings and draws life from all whom it may cross. It doesn't bring death upon others, it simply takes the life energy that exists so that it may be reused elsewhere, such as in the birth of a new creature. Of course, we can technically state that it created Megastones alongside Xerneas, but that's primarily the byproduct of AZ using them for the ultimate weapon. Outside of this, though, Yveltal really doesn't do much currently and exists with no real history that I'm aware of. Meanwhile, Xerneas does have one other piece of history to it, as it is the Illumina Pokemon within the Lental region. It saved the region from a disastrous meteor, and even Jirachi can be found here, bringing yet another tie between Hoenn and Kalos, amongst many other ties. Its ability that grants this Illumina phenomenon has placed 5 Pokemon into the center of each island as guardians were an event to ever occur that needs to be prevented again. Each of them affect the islands in great ways that provide perfect homes for the Pokemon within the lands of Lental, and if you want to not only hear, but see more on that, go check out my complete ecology video of the Lental region, or Pokemon Snap. It is also implied that whether it be through Lental or use of the ultimate weapon, that Xerneas is left in its weakened state just as Yveltal is, and needs time to rebuild its energy and recover. From here, though, they just kind of exist and serve their purpose. Meanwhile, our boy Zygarde is actively found throughout the entire world of Pokemon, watching closely for the first sign of trouble. Technically, it's actually watching for when it is necessary for it to step in and do something, because there are a lot of instances in which it hasn't stepped in, but when it does need to enter the scene, we are truly screwed without it. 3 instances in which it has stepped in would include when Lysander created the artificial Zygarde with the intent to absorb the true Zygarde. The second is when Ultra Beasts were entering Alola, and the third would be when it fought Ultra Necrozma within the manga. And that second one is partially true, partially scrapped information from when the Sun and Moon games were released, because it has been revealed that Zygarde was definitely entering Alola on a mission to eliminate a beast within End Cave. This beast, of course, has to be Guzzlord, at least I imagine it is. You know, Guzzlord, the Pokemon that would absolutely be labeled as cataclysmic, and one of the few Pokemon with a proper kill count, if we assume that it was the one that killed the unnamed Faller. Zygarde, ultimately though, is our emergency button that is pressed after all of our other emergency buttons fail. And if Zygarde fails, then we are all very, very much in a bad place. So whatever is happening within New Lumios is clearly so terrifyingly bad that we're definitely having to team up with Zygarde to put an end to it. You know, don't mind Pokemon preparing to give Zygarde, Hoopa, and Eternal Floette Mega Forms. I'm prepared for it, and I'll be more surprised if I'm wrong, especially considering Deoxys already has a Mega Form and wasn't story relevant within the games. Yet, at least. I'm looking at you, Sunistar Dial, or Anastar Sundial. But back to Zygarde with that little tangent away. It absolutely has the capacity to not only completely decimate just about every Pokemon, but it will then use its power to restore the unbalanced ecosystem and return it to normal. After all, it's one thing to stop a threat and another one to fix the problem that the threat caused. Even then though, this 100% form is not necessarily all-powerful, it definitely needs some extra help depending on what the threat is. So of course, that's when a bond between trainer and Pokemon comes handy, or extra handy. I love Zygarde so much. After all, being a huge ecology nerd, how could I not love the literal guardian of the ecosystem? But how about we move forward and talk about the mythicals of the Kalos region? Volcanion's information may honestly be the shortest of all because we know infuriatingly little about this Pokemon. It has knowledge on Magearna and has visited the regions of Kalos, Johto, and Sinnoh, and that is quite literally it. There's a pretty good chance, just like Magearna, it was created as a hidden weapon that is meant to be a parallel to the ultimate weapon, but that's kind of a massive leap of theory. In this case, I may as well talk about Magearna, a generation early, since it also has no real effect on the ecosystem unless humanity makes it use its cannon that resembles the ultimate weapon or has it summon the giant airship. Though, at least with Magearna, we understand that it has a soul heart, which was created through a collection of infinite energy, which would have then been derived from the life energy of Pokemon that would then be sacrificed for it to be created. Magearna is effectively a living, smaller version of the ultimate weapon, and I swear if they left field ZA with it as like a major component of it, I'll actually be pleasantly surprised. But moving on. Deoxys, or Deoxys, however the heck you want to say it, is also fairly short as she simply keeps herself secluded within her crystal kingdom and is surrounded by the many Carbink that will one day become Deoxys. In fact, it is thought that there may be many pockets of these crystal kingdoms throughout the underground world. This would then allow us to assume that this kingdom will always be centered around a Deoxys and a Heart Diamond, or each of these kingdoms will be. Which, the Heart Diamond is a large diamond that is created by Deoxys that sustains the land and provides the kingdom with energy and tranquility. Look, you gotta protect yourself somehow from the Sableye looking to eat your family jewels. Deoxys can create another one of these massive diamonds, but requires a ridiculous amount of energy in order to do so. And Xerneas was sought after as a source for this energy within the movie. The way this was then completed was only once Xerneas granted Deoxys with its Mega Evolution. So I guess it isn't always a byproduct of the ultimate weapon. Wait, does this mean that I can just fire Xerneas at any Pokemon and force a potential Mega Evolution by fueling them with excess life energy? I mean, that's already what Mega Evolution does, since it takes a lot of life energy to achieve. What if you just took Xerneas and just fired it onto the entirety of Lumio City and all the Pokemon become Mega Pokemon? That'd be wild. But that would also mean that the Mega Stones are literally just conduits or batteries filled with life energy of Pokemon, and we're using it when we Mega Evolve our Pokemon. Our own little Philosopher's Stone for every single one of them. Lovely, isn't it? Look, Deoxys' effect may seem small, but it does have its role in the ecosystem, at least, as it helps keep the Carbink alive and happy. We've already mentioned the atrocities that Hoopa committed in the past, but now Hoopa is back committing new atrocities and chaos through the distribution of Mega Stones from other dimensions, or from our dimension to other dimensions. I'm not really sure how that works, and we don't really know the extent of its reach or the effects, how much it has done this in the past, how much it will do so in the future. But let me tell you, this massively changes everything we might know about Mega Pokemon. Something that has always bothered me, and I hope that this answers, is that so many Pokemon unlock ancient DNA or are described as having certain natural behaviors that you would only see in the wild. An example being Mega Sceptile as the Dragon Guardian of the Forest, as stated through a Mega Evolution Pokédex short. This, amongst other entries, bring this question of how do you know these behaviors if they only Mega Evolve for battle? Could this mean that Pokemon used to exist as their Mega forms in the past naturally at one point? We kind of already know that this is kind of the case for Pokemon like Aerodactyl and Ampharos who unlock their ancient DNA, but what if this was the case for many, if not all of our Pokemon? How would this change what we understand about Mega Evolution? And I'm sure if Professor Sycamore heard any of this, he would be frothing at the mouth. Now, I'm just saying, if Hoopa threw some Mega Stones into the past, just boom, boom, you know, to mess with things like the little chaotic gremlin it is, I wouldn't be surprised. Or if Xerneas interacted with more Pokemon that it deemed special and gave them the energy necessary to stay in a Mega Evolved state until the day they passed away for some unknown purpose. The possibilities are genuinely endless at this point, and I blame Hoopa for it. And I kind of need a little Hoopa Unbound statue somewhere in my office now. That'd be nice. On to Generation 7 with a real short one because Type Null is removed from the ecosystem. It is a chimera created by the Aether Foundation and then later created by the Macrocosmos within Galar as they stole the documents from Aether. Other than this bit of information, it's a creature created in Arceus' image and will likely never be brought into nature as just a freely existing thing, just being used under a trainer's care. The 4 Tapus of Alola, though, are deeply rooted in nature and the ecosystem. They are powered by the health of the ecosystem there, which is how they have Nature's Wrath as their signature moves. And in an alternate timeline when Alola was polluted, the Tapus no longer had the power to defend the islands from the threat that is Guzzlord when it appeared. And while they are assisted and fueled by one other thing, let's talk about just how massive an impact they have within Alola. So much so that they are still worshipped and respected to the modern day. Each of the Tapus represent different aspects, though they all bear the moniker of the land spirit Pokemon. Koko has a trigger temper, though it brims with curiosity, a fitting Pokemon for the first of the Tapus we meet, a sign of new beginnings and open curiosity. Lele of the second island is a Pokemon that can grant great health or even restore health with its scales that it scatters throughout the lands. Though it is through these scales that you can be harmed, as they find a way to stimulate and heal you beyond your body's limits. It doesn't really care that it does this either. It's known to be devoid of guilt and can be incredibly cruel. Also, it's noted to be a potential reason for the hardly mentioned Alolan Wars ending. Then you have Tapu Bulu, who commands vegetation to grow and change shape at its own will. And while it may seem lazy, when nature is harmed, it will go on a violent rampage. Such was the case when, nearby the village, a Mega Mart was built, ruining the splendor of the area, so it kind of destroyed the entire Tapu village. Though finally there is Tapu Fini, who represents not only the end of our journey, but the end to life itself and the beginning of our new journey, as it even bears powers over mist and the veil between life and death. Each of the Tapus are incredible in their power, and even in their natural existence, they have caused not only the people of Alola to live fruitfully with nature as a culture, but they have even continued to affect nature itself. The greatest example would be the 4 different types of seeds found within Alola, 4 seeds that bear typings of electric, grassy, misty, and psychic. And yes, I know Misty isn't a type, but bear with me because these do otherwise match with our 4 Tapus. This extends further from the seeds and into the diets of Pokemon through the plants that grow throughout Alola, because these seeds can be assumed to grow into the very flowers that Oricorio consumes the nectar from. If not, then these flowers are still influenced into their state by the effect of the Tapus, thus allowing the Oricorios to gain traits or typings from the remnant energy of the Tapus. Bile-style Oricorio, admittedly though, is the strange one of the bunch, but it still has the fiery personality of Tapu Bulu and resides upon Ula Ula Island, so it still checks out. Though if all of this deeply ingrained effect on the ecosystem wasn't enough to convince you, then not only do these fierce deities protect Alola from Ultra Beasts and any other threat, but without them we would likely not even have Cosmog. This is because many years ago, Lunala and Solgaleo burst from the Ultra Wormhole, absolutely slammed the 4 Tapus, and dumped a truckload of their Nebby babies onto the 4 deities as their new protectors and babysitters. And I'm not even remotely kidding. I feel like that's the 3rd time I've said this. Sorry. This is what happened, and it is kind of a little bit funny to me that someone just absolutely decimates somebody else and then forces them to adopt children afterwards. So these 4 Pokemon have incredible effects on the ecosystem as a whole, helping each of the islands thrive in their own magical way, and even leading this effect into helping the multiverse, which we're going to get to real soon here, because the Nebby line is a strange one that honestly serves more as a leading extension into how our future entry works, or at least that's how I interpret it. Cosmog is dumped onto Alola, feeds on space dust like the good little cosmos creature it is, eventually becomes dense enough to become a protostar in the form of Cosmoem, and then will eventually fully form into the celestial body of the sun or the moon as it becomes either Solgaleo or Lunala. Honestly, pretty far removed from our world, it just seems to freeload on our universe, but that's okay. It's cute. Extending from this though, Solgaleo and Lunala serve as a far more important piece of the multiverse as we know it, for they are no more than a battery to recharge the great Ultra Necrozma. Yes, we are jumping immediately into Necrozma, arguably one of the most terrifying Pokemon in existence, because not only is it the reason for all of the Ultra wormholes opening up, it is the reason for Z-moves existing, Z-power, Totem Pokemon, Z-crystals, and how both Alola and the Tapus get their natural power. I will even argue that without Ultra Necrozma's light, Pokemon such as Alola and Exeggutor would not exist. I state this because if you evolve an Exeggutor within the Blueberry Academy biome where you can find Alolan variants, you will not get its Alolan form. Even Alolan Raichu can be found on the beaches of Lentil, but not Alolan Exeggutor, despite the conditions seeming to be just right. And I argue this because the light needs to be from the Great Blinding One, a Pokemon that is part dragon, as Exeggutor itself gains that dragon typing within Alola. Leading off of this though, whether Necrozma was attacked or was struck by a meteor in lore, it still lost its pure form, leaving it in this darkened and corrupted state where it is constantly racked with pain. Its only solace is to be charged with enough Z energy to restore it, absorb enough of the crystals that broke off from its body, absorb enough light from the universe, or absorb Solgaleo and Lunala. We've seen what happens when it takes light from the universe, as those in Ultra Megalopolis have lived without light for so long that they have adapted to have blue skin, much akin to how many other creatures in similar real-life conditions may adapt to look. They're just lucky that they didn't go blind after enough time, get big old pure white eyes, you know? But to speak on the Solgaleo and Lunala part, the two of them are able to create endless sunlight and endless moonlight, making them the perfect recharge button for Necrozma. Though, at least within every medium, there is still one other problem. For you see, even after being restored, every piece of media, excluding the anime, implies that even in its true form, it is not yet back to its full power and may one day return to the corrupted state. Which, considering that it appears within Galar through the max raid battles in a canonical encounter that is described through the notes of Moan of the Aether Foundation, this is very much a thing, a very, very terrifying thing. So what if it can never stay in its full form, even before it ended up becoming damaged? Well, that's where the sheer number of dumped Nebbies come in. Solgaleo and Lunala knew that this was the case, that their fate is like prey to the predator and meant to refuel Necrozma so it can give back to the universe and continue this massive cycle of life. And there is at least one scenario that is described to be a positive, or rather massive positive, by the light of Necrozma other than what happens in Alola. For without Ultra Necrozma's light, within the anime, the world of Poipole and Naganadel will continue to die. Plants will not bloom, light does not exist, and all of life will perish. And while we don't know the full effect that this light may have elsewhere throughout the universes, there is a lot of suspicion that its light, or Necrozma's light, does affect each and every other universe that it shines upon, and this would include the Ultra Beasts in their own worlds. As a note, I won't be talking about the Ultra Beasts because they are basically just invasive species to the ecosystem that just want to return home, nice and clean. Once again, we have mythicals that mostly don't affect the world around them in terms of the ecosystem, at least not that we've currently been made aware of in official lore. Marshadow sticks to the shadows and says, I could do everything you can do, but I could do it better. Meltan and Melmetal were once worshipped by ancient people and eat metal. Now that they've been released once more, that does not mean that you're allowed to eat drywall, and Zorora is actually one that has just a bit more going on for it. Not only is it stated to be born when lightning strikes an erupting volcano, thank you Raikou and Entei, or Zapdos and Entei, or literally any combination of legendary Pokemon related to lightning and volcanoes. Zorora has had two major appearances, once when used to fight Guzzlord in an alternate reality, and another where it was considered a myth despite saving people from a fire many years ago. Zorora was, interestingly enough, a Pokemon that became hostile with people because of their mistreatment of the environment. But here's the kicker. This Zorora was a resident near the city of Fula, or Fura, a place that is not explicitly stated to exist in any known region. The only real clue we have is that this is a movie that debuted in Sun and Moon era, but it also revolves around the blessings of Lugia, and the voice actresses for the Nurse Joys in the movie belong to the ones residing in Unova and the Decolor Islands, which exist between Unova and Kanto. In other words, Zorora and this movie and the location of this city is a bit of a mess, but that's not their fault, technically. You know, Zorora just wants people to treat the environment right to prevent situations like what we see with Guzzlord. And honestly, there's nothing saying that the two Zorora aren't the same Pokemon, especially as it was distributed within the Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon games with an event with its hometown being Fura, but take that with a grain of salt. I just think it would be incredibly fitting that such a strong and aggressive protector of nature would see it become undone as the last fighter in a ruined alternative world. Zorora, being a protector of nature and peace, isn't just secluded to the anime though, as it retains this role within the Switch's Pokemon Snap, as it will throw down with a Tyranitar that was prepared to fight a Crustle after we rudely woke that Crustle up. I'm just grateful that, you know, Zorora didn't try to punch me and the Neo won. But hey, it allows us to gather more data and examples of how Zorora behaves and allows us to understand it as another guardian of nature. Galar's legendary mythical Pokemon, excluding the Regis, are all interconnected through their lore. Their effect on the ecosystems is technically a little bit different, but it'll kind of be snuck in here as we go along. Now, I've covered all of this in heavy detail in my Gmax Pokemon video, but let me give you those baller cliff notes here. Eternax comes crashing down for whatever reason, goes night-night for a couple thousand years, and eventually wakes up and is a big old cranky jerk about it. It releases Galar particles in large amounts, blots out the sky, causes a shift in the climate which has only worsened over the years thanks to, you know, Galarian industrial efforts, and is only stopped by 4 legendary Pokemon. Oh, you thought it was just Zacian, Zamazenta, and the 2 heroes? Nope! It is directly stated through their Pokedex entries that Zacian is the sword of the Fairy King and Zamazenta was the Fighting Master's shield. These 2 descriptions are exactly what Fairy King Calyrex and Urshifu are, with Urshifu literally meaning Bear Master if we break its name apart and translate it. So, cool. They stopped the big scary eldritch monster of biblical proportions and we're fine now, right? Nope. In fact, the Urshifu and Kubfu are basically wiped out or migrate as they are no longer natural residents of Galar. Our doggies are so tired that they go night-night in the slumbering wild, and Calyrex is so beat up that humans discover it in its weakened state, save it, and bring it back to health. All while the many particles that blotted off the sky continue to fall many years later and have created wishing stars or even dens in which the irradiating power of Eternatus leaks out and fuels Pokemon. Again, not an exaggeration, Eternatus' power is literally radiation, which apparently there was a theory that all of it was a projection and Gmax Pokemon or Dynamax Pokemon aren't actually real, and to that I say no, all of our Pokemon get to transform into giant Daikaiju for our entertainment and gym leader brand sponsorships. Meanwhile, somewhere in all this time, Calyrex not only tames Glastrier and Spectrier, who froze people or stole their life energy, but also became so well worshipped that Calyrex too gained biblical proportions of power. Calyrex directly states to us that it was once worshipped and it had the power to move entire forests. It could move one hand to cause the land to become covered in verdant grass and blooms, while its other hand would make the fields of fruit ripen and heavy. It was nicknamed the King of the Bountiful Harvests. It could even heal others through blessings, heal their hearts, which I assume would be similar to our Manaphy's heart swap. It will even turn the other cheek after defeating an enemy, healing them after obliterating them in battle. Effectively, without any of these Pokemon, Galar just probably wouldn't exist. And I don't mean to blaze through them, but their full effect can't be seen if we looked at them one at a time disjointedly. The only other detail within this, or within Galar, is that our legendary dog duo have one other Pokemon that is absolutely deeply involved with them while they sleep. because while in the Slumbering Wild, you'll first encounter them in a battle, you can't hit them, they won't hit you, and the mist just grows thicker over the course of the battle. And while it was a question on whether or not they were ever really there, I can guarantee that they weren't. This is because of a level 45 to level 47 Munna, not Musharna, Munna, that exists within the wild. A Pokemon that can turn dreams into reality with its dream mist, and feeds on the dreams of others without causing harm, thus explaining the dog's presence without actually being there. A sort of defense mechanism as they rest, a way to cooperate with other Pokemon in the area. In fact, one might argue the majority of the evolved Pokemon there are serving to protect the dogs while they rest. Butterfree using its scales to inflict drowsiness on you, Galarian Wheezing moving in the mist and fog, Stunfisk serving as a literal trap, Orbeetle being an incredible psychic Pokemon that can control your mind, and Corviknight who can carry away someone who has been knocked out through any of these harmless effects. I love when a location comes together like this. It makes me feel a little bit giddy while I'm writing out this script. So while these Pokemon don't have a terrain that we can truly study, their overarching effect on the ecosystem and how it functions is pretty well seen. Also, I lied to you, there's one more Pokemon in Galar which would be the exception to this grouping, and is Zarude. Mythical in nature and living in groups, they do serve as another protector of jungles and acts as a balancing factor, giving and taking from its home. It can absorb energy from trees, but it will also tear off its vines and use them to revitalize the soil of forests, while even being able to rapidly heal wounds with their power. Pretty standard stuff all in all, especially when it is considered an aggressive protector of the forests that it resides in. We're in the final region, and we're going to open up with all of the Paradox Pokemon, including Miraidon and Koraidon. These Pokemon are invasive species, effectively. Actually, no, they literally are invasive species. And this is part of the major plot of Scarlet and Violet, as if they were left to their own devices, AI Toro and Sada state that Paldea's ecosystem would be completely destroyed. These Pokemon truly originate from alternate timelines in the past or future parallels to our own timeline, but so much of their information is simply incorrect and unknown thanks to information that exists within the Pokemon world itself, or rather misinformation. We don't know what really happened in their home universes, we don't fully understand their behavior other than aggressive, but they are effectively no different than how we understand the Ultra Beasts. They are upset and they want to go home by any means necessary. This will lead me into talking about Terapagos, because without it, all of Paldea would not be experiencing the Terrastal phenomenon, and we would not have the Paradox Pokemon. This is known because the crystals used for terrestrialization are directly created by Terapagos as the center of the phenomenon. Not only this, but those crystals were used by Turo and Sada to not only create their AI, but also to fuel all of their high-tech equipment within their labs that allowed them to breach other timelines. Because of Terapagos falling into the chasm so long ago, it even resulted in the Area Zero underdepths being completely overtaken by crystals, making it an uninhabitable space unless you're one of these 6 exceptions found within the area. Glamora and Sandy Shocks, who are deriving energy from the crystals or eating them, Garganacl, who is technically a crystal itself by being a living salt rock, Iron Thorns, who assumedly doesn't need to eat, or maybe it's like a real Tyranitar and it does eat rocks and crystals, and then both Noivern and Garchomp, who can fly in and out of this area as they please with incredible ease. Actually, Garchomp probably loves this place since Gabite loves collecting shiny objects for their own hoard, so now I kind of imagine a Garchomp making this their lair, or gathering crystals for their home nest. It's honestly not a super complicated area, all in all, and the upper areas are more or less natural and unaffected by Terapagos, unless you want to consider the Paradox Pokemon that begin showing up there later and making a mess of things. I love the Ruinous Quartet, their designs, their horrifying lore that ties them to the atrocities of mankind, as even Tingalu's bowl is the exact design of a real-life sacrificial bowl from ancient history, and of course, how the 4 of them managed to affect their environments even while being completely sealed away to protect humanity and Pokemon. They're called Ruinous for a reason, y'all. It doesn't show all that well, I'll admit, but they all have at least a minor effect. Fire Scourge for Chi-Yu, an empty cave with only a trickle of water coming out of it, no grass, no vegetation, just rocks that await being melted by Chi-Yu swimming through them. Ice Rend for Qianpao, a place where immediately in front of the shrine is only snow of ice, despite that not being the case for the rest of the area. Ground Blight Shrine, which is better named in direct translation as the Shrine of Dusty Earth, as we have flat, grassless land meant to make us think of earthquakes, after the dust settles. And Grass Wither Shrine, which for some reason doesn't have any effect whatsoever, but you would expect it to literally be withering, thanks to Wo Qian having the ability to pull life energy from surrounding vegetation for its powers. At the end of the day, they have massive secrets about them, but are not really part of ecology itself because they've been sealed away for so long. Petulant and the Loyal Three are also fairly isolated. They have strong cultural impacts upon the people of Kitsukami and serve as an interesting parallel to the worship and celebration that Ho-Oh and Lugia receive within Johto, but they have a very simple relationship. Petulant wants praise from the people it loves. It will get anything to make those people happy and gift it to them. It feeds everyone mochi, so it can get these things easier by putting them under its control, and even feeds mochi to those it loves because it wants to know their unfiltered desires. This eventually causes Petulant to seek greater and greater things with the help of the Loyal Three after it transformed them to be stronger, smarter, and more beautiful, and resulted in them encountering Ogerpon and trying to take its masks. Big mistake there, of course, because Ogerpon went on a rampage that resulted in the Loyal Three literally being confirmed to be dead, and Petulant enclosing itself in a shell to hide and protect itself until it could return in the future. And while yes, there is a massive cultural impact, there's nothing else that really occurs here unless we dig into how in the world the Loyal Three were even revived, because it is not clearly stated as to why. What I suspect is that belief, wishes, and strong emotions, they all play a massive part within Pokemon, and so much so that they have changed the world as we know it and have even revived Pokemon. And through not only the worship, but potentially even the strength of Kyuren's negative emotions, were the three revived from their burial site. This, of course, happens during the moment in which Kyurem was at his turning point. He was lied to by us in Carmine, lost repeatedly to us in battle, and was rejected by Ogerpon as a trainer, which, pretty harsh. He was at the peak of his anger and frustration and snapped after this. So it's no wonder that an incredibly strong emotion could revive these three. An emotion of potentially jealousy, of want and desire. That, and there's a very good chance that if Kyurem and Carmine are related to ZA's Corbeau, then our three humans match really well with the Loyal Three here and tie it all together with a really nice bow. And for the last time I'll say it today, that's a whole other separate topic I'm not talking about here. The last Pokemon we can talk about, of course, is Ogerpon, because while we don't get to see its interaction with the world, we do get to learn about how it harnesses the power of nature itself to its benefit and the benefit of the world, or at least the area around it. The Teal Mask has the power to restore life to withered plants. Wellspring is able to draw upon the power of water, even stop the flow of a river. Hearth Flame allows it to turn the flame of a candle into a raging inferno, and Cornerstone allows it to take harder impacts while also allowing it to break even the hardest stone in two. 4 masks, 4 elements in nature, and while you might say grass is not an element, when we look at some Eastern practices, such as in China, we have the 5 phases: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, with Wu Jing essentially being the balance of and control over these elements. I do wish we had more to talk about with these last Pokemon, but they are fairly secluded in how they function or are found and don't have much of a domain to study or a greater effect on Pokemon that is concrete and not just pure speculation, which I try to avoid, or am avoiding in this video at least. But with that, we've covered the effects that legendary Pokemon have on the ecosystem. This is the last video that I am making before I get to experience the wonder of Legends ZA, and I'm excited for all the lore, the science, history, nature, everything that I can provide, and I hope you're excited to go on that journey with me through streams and the eventual videos that will follow, because those will be some big videos. So come join me in the research and my delving into the games as a whole. If you did enjoy this, please ensure that you do subscribe, leave a comment about what you're most excited for in terms of what videos I could make for ZA, and know that through your watch time and comments, it boosts the reach of my videos, which is a great help. And if you'd like to go that extra mile, become a member on here or Patreon for as little as $3 a month for perks such as your name at the end of credits of every video, stumbled that a little bit, and at least become a free member on Patreon or join the Discord so you can make sure you never miss a video release. But how about we finally go and thank all of our members. Thank you to all of our members of the channel, starting with the Gods of Hope, Quill, Final Fantasy 14, Heals for Life, Biggins, Vatty, Nip, Buzz, and Summer, then the champions, Nias Costa and Joshua Biggins Wilson, then the Knights of the Court, Crumbo, Vatty 11, Zoomster, and Kelsey Hoover covers, Luke Sasty, Vio, Shiny Gem, Sarah Brisbois, Fix My Nitrogen, Krill, Final Fantasy 14, Powwow, Allen, Heals for Life, Bass Mulder, Blue, Dalek, Warren, Hempfeld, then all of the Wanderers, Gal, Cal, Star S, Lumina Malralph, Zach Earlwood, Reed, Ion, I'm not sure how to say that, I apologize, Samar, Faye, Nadra, Starbreed, Bob D, Fish, Ganglefress, what is that? This is not Digital Circus. Tyrone Jones, Electro, Lucario, Live R360, Bex, Nicole Macayo, Justin Patrick, Just Bad, Brian Millie, CGA, Planet Blob, Evan, Electric Solar, Biesel Bay, Ruby, Jelandine, Desporty Yappers, Legs Keep Moving Forward, Suki Satsuki, 232, The Black Dragon, Knit, Ruthless Hauser, Michael Stein, J. Gill, Jacob Square, Mr. Helagonalips, Super Saiyan, Son Goku, Venny Samaru, Max Supreme, Shadowhawk 19, Lost Mysteria, Zakai, Pyromaster, Abdallah Aladi, Gaming Ruse, 90707, Evil Chan, Micah 626 Gaming, Nicole Manassi, and Kristen, Sandwich Boss Emmy, whatever this is, Alona Figment, Medico TH73, Sydney House, Miss Zorwa, Dakota Couch, Brad Sundiver, Drixel, Carl Jean, Hunter Al, Hussein Kasama, Rekka, Kano Hugh, Jebby W, Memento Mortal, Marshy, Edward Kasowski, Fennec Fox, Hag, Adikadabra, King Pine, Checker Frost, Richard Ivy, Addy C, DJ Monk 23, Squidwater, Rice Smith, Gamer, Just J, MD, Horse with a Cocktail, Muse, Art Wills, Lumiel, Eastgander 072, Andrew Foss, Peak Anonymous, Summit Sloth, Nocturne, Ian Ray, Big and C9, Quarter Cup, A Sleepy Bear, Jericho, Michael Vale, Unseelie King, Deforian Skies, Daniel Tracy, Garrett Hoffman, Dylan Peters, Malachi Burkhardt, and Heather Whitenet. Thank you all for being members of the channel. Your support goes a mile in ways that you guys do not realize. So thank you for supporting the channel. It means the world to me. And as always, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time.